Section 1. The Birth of a Wasteland. There is something quietly hypnotic about the world of Fallout. The way a Geiger counter ticks in a ruined building. The way old jazz music drifts through a crumbling radio speaker while the sun sets over a landscape of ash and rust. There is beauty in the wreckage. There is warmth buried inside all that desolation. And the secrets hiding in every corner of the wasteland have kept people coming back for almost 30 years. So settle in, let the noise of the day fall away. Close your eyes if you want. We are going on a very long, very slow walk through the entire history of Fallout, its secrets, its theories, its hidden lore, and the remarkable, sometimes chaotic story of how the whole thing came to be. Let's start at the beginning. Not the beginning of the games, but the beginning of the idea. In the early 1990s, a programmer at a California game company called Interplay Entertainment was sitting at his desk, quietly building something nobody had asked him to build. His name was Tim Kaine. He had joined Interplay in 1991 after getting his master's degree in computer science at the University of California, Irvine. He had loved tabletop role-playing games since he was a teenager. His mother had once brought him to a gathering of Navy officers who played advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and that evening changed the direction of his entire life. At Interplay, Kaine was nominally supposed to be making game installers, utility work, background stuff. But Kaine had a habit of building engines on the side, just because he enjoyed it. He made a voxel engine. He made a 3D engine. And then, somewhere around 1993, he built an isometric sprite engine that he really liked. It moved well, it felt right, and it occurred to him that the engine would make a pretty good game. He started building a combat system on top of it, rooted in a tabletop rule set called GURPS, the Generic Universal Role-Playing System, created by Steve Jackson Games. Kaine had been running pen and paper GURPS sessions with his coworkers a few evenings a week. He understood the system deeply, so he wired it into his engine and kept building. And for the first 6 months, he was the only person working on the project at all. For 6 months, it was just Tim Kaine and an idea in a room. Eventually, other people started joining him. Leonard Boyarsky came aboard to handle the art direction. Jason D. Anderson helped with design. A team slowly assembled around a project that still had no official approval from Interplay's executive leadership. In a lot of ways, Fallout's earliest days were a rogue operation, a group of people making the game they wanted to make because no one had told them not to. It was, as one former developer would later describe it, always seen as a B project, secondary, not the flagship. That attitude would follow the game all the way to its release. The world Kaine and his collaborators created was deliberately pulled from two very specific aesthetic wells. The first was the American 1950s, not the real 1950s, with its anxieties and injustices, but the idealized version of the 1950s that existed in advertising, in propaganda posters, in the clean suburban imagination of that era. Smiling families, gleaming kitchen appliances, atomic-powered everything. A future that was bright and clean and reeked of optimism, even as nuclear warheads sat in silos pointing at the sky. The second well was nuclear fear, the paranoia and dread that lurked beneath all that post-war cheerfulness, the knowledge that everything could end in a flash. Fallout took those two things, the optimism and the annihilation, and let them collide. The result was a world that felt familiar and horrifying at the same time. A world that looked like it had been designed in 1955 and destroyed in 2077. The special system's strength, perception, endurance, charisma, intelligence, agility, luck replaced GURPS after a disagreement with Steve Jackson Games over the game's violent content. Jackson objected to some of what the team had planned. So Kaine and his colleagues built their own system from scratch, and Specular became one of the most beloved character creation frameworks in RPG history. Every version of Fallout since has kept it, modifying it slightly but never abandoning its core structure. It started because they couldn't use someone else's rulebook. The game nearly didn't have a title at all. Early on, it was internally referred to as simply the GURPS Project. When the team finally needed a real name, they settled on Fallout, a word that meant exactly what it suggested. The fallout after nuclear war. The consequence of things falling apart. It was simple. It was correct. It stuck. There is a detail about the very first Fallout game that almost no one knows, and it changes the way the whole franchise feels once you hear it. Tim Kaine wrote Fallout's single most famous line War. War never changes, and it was his only writing contribution to the first game. He was a programmer and a producer. Writing was not his primary job, but he wrote those 4 words, and they became the thematic cornerstone of a franchise that now spans nearly 3 decades. An entire mythology built around a sentence a programmer wrote almost as an afterthought. If you go into the Fallout 1 credits and type the word boom, an animation plays of Tim Kaine's head exploding. A small, delightful piece of developer humor that nobody would ever find unless they were specifically looking for it. That kind of hidden detail, that spirit of leaving something small and personal tucked inside the code, would define the entire series going forward. The development of Fallout was not comfortable. Kaine worked 12-hour days, 7 days a week, for 2 solid years. He woke at 6 in the morning, arrived at the Interplay office by 7 so he could code in silence before the meetings began, and typically left around 7 in the evening. Then he went home and kept working until 10. He lived paycheck to paycheck. He could not afford to buy lunch, so he prepared food at home each morning. He rented out a room in his house to a production assistant named Fred Hatch just to help cover his bills. And yet, there was something in the air around that game. The QA testers at Interplay started coming in on nights and weekends, voluntarily and without extra pay, just to play early builds of it. About 6 months before release, even before it had shipped, word spread through the studio that something special was being made. People felt it. The game had a gravity to it. Fallout released in October 1997. It was a 2D isometric RPG with a turn-based combat system and a story that began in an underground bunker and sent the player out into the irradiated wilderness of a ruined California. The player character was called the Vault Dweller. The world outside the vault was called the Wasteland. And somewhere out there was a water chip the vault needed, and a far more dangerous threat that the Vault Dweller would eventually have to face. It reviewed well. Players who found it fell deeply into it, but it was never a mainstream sensation in the way later entries would be. It was a niche game for a niche audience, and Interplay treated it that way. When Kaine expressed a desire to work on something else after Fallout, he was placed on Fallout 2 anyway over his objections. He left the project months into development, burned out and frustrated after executive producer Brian Fargo reduced his bonus over a bug that had delayed the first game's launch. Kaine wouldn't return to the franchise until decades later. Leonard Boyarsky and Jason Anderson left with him. 3 of the core architects of Fallout's identity gone before the sequel was even finished. Fallout 2 released in October 1998. It was made under enormous pressure. Interplay was struggling financially, and the development timeline was compressed to roughly 9 months. The result was a game that felt looser than the first. Tonally messier, stuffed with pop culture references and broad comedy, that Kaine's rule of no jokes or cultural references that wouldn't make sense to players who didn't understand them would never have allowed. There are Monty Python references in Fallout 2. There are nods to Godzilla. There are winking self-aware moments that feel like they belong to a different project. But there is also extraordinary writing in there, extraordinary world building, and the universe Kaine and Boyarsky had built proved durable enough to survive the tonal turbulence. After the second game, the future of Fallout became murky. Black Isle Studios, the division of Interplay that had developed the series, began work on a third entry codenamed Van Buren. It would have been set in the American Southwest, centered on a prison break in a place called Tibbetts Prison. A version of it exists as a prototype, a glimpse of what the franchise might have been if circumstances had bent a different way. But Interplay's financial troubles deepened. In December 2003, Black Isle was closed. Van Buren was canceled. Several of the team members went on to form Obsidian Entertainment, which would eventually get its own chapter in the Fallout story. And then, in 2004, Bethesda Game Studios acquired the Fallout license. A man named Todd Howard had been pushing for it. Howard had first encountered Fallout because his brother had played it before he did. His brother said to him, "You have to play Fallout." And Howard said he hadn't had the chance yet, so he took the disc. He later admitted in interviews that he stole his brother's copy and never gave it back. He was working at Bethesda at the time Fallout came out in 1997, already deep in the Elder Scrolls series. He played Fallout and became fascinated with it. He called its atmosphere and its rules brilliant and so unique. When Bethesda announced in July 2004 that it had acquired the rights to develop Fallout 3, Howard was the man leading the charge. And whatever you think of the choices that were made, whatever discussions continue in forums and comment sections about what Fallout became under Bethesda's hands, the thing that drove the acquisition was genuine love. Howard had been a fan. He hadn't inherited the series through corporate calculation. He had stolen a disc from his brother. That detail matters. It changes the texture of everything that followed. But before we follow Bethesda into the capital wasteland, we need to descend. We need to go underground. Because the most important thing in all of Fallout is not the wasteland above. It is the vaults below. If you're watching this right now, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe. There's a lot more on the way, and I'd love to have you along for it. Section 2. The Vaults, Vault-Tec's Hidden Cruelty. Pull the great steel door shut. Listen to the pressure seals engage. Feel the air recycling through the ventilation system, cool and slightly metallic on your tongue. You are safe now. The world above is burning, but you are safe. That is what Vault-Tec told everyone. That is the lie at the heart of Fallout. Vault-Tec built its network of underground shelters in the years leading up to what the Fallout universe calls the Great War, the nuclear exchange of the 23rd of October 2077 that ended civilization in a single day. The official story was always protection, humanity's best chance, a way of preserving a portion of the American population through the worst of the fallout and positioning society for an eventual recovery. A noble project, a patriotic endeavor. The truth was something else entirely. Vault-Tec, working in conjunction with the United States government and a collection of powerful pre-war corporations, had turned the Vault program into the largest involuntary human experimentation project in history. Project Safehouse, as it was officially known, had its public face. The shelters would protect people. Behind closed doors, nearly every vault was designed to be something else. A laboratory, a controlled environment for testing human behavior under extreme conditions. The people who entered those vaults were not survivors being given a second chance. They were test subjects who had been told a different story. Only a small fraction of the vaults had no experiment attached. Those were intended to serve as control groups, baseline comparisons that would make the data from the experimental vaults more meaningful. The cruelty was systematic. It was planned. Someone wrote memos about it, someone signed off on the budget line items. The variety of experiments is the thing that haunts you once you start learning about them. Not one vault, not two, dozens, each one different, each one revealing a new dimension of the same institutional madness. Vault 12 never sealed its door. Not fully. A deliberate design flaw meant radiation leaked into the facility continuously. The people inside became ghouls, mutated, hairless, irradiated, but alive after a fashion. The city of Necropolis, in the original Fallout game, was built by those ghoul survivors. An entire community founded on a lie about shelter. Vault 29 was populated entirely by children. No adults were permitted inside. A supercomputer called ZAX raised them. The children of Vault 29 grew up in isolation, guided by an artificial intelligence that had its own ideas about what their future should look like. Vault 68 had 1 woman and 999 men. Vault 69 had 1 man and 999 women. Someone at Vault-Tec thought these sounded like interesting experiments in social dynamics. The experiments had predictable outcomes in both directions. Vault 77 received 1 man and a crate of puppets. This one actually crossed into official Fallout lore through a penny arcade webcomic that Bethesda deemed canon. The lone occupant of Vault 77 eventually escaped into the wasteland and became a figure of legend, the Puppet Man, a ghost story told among slavers who feared him for reasons they could not fully articulate. A jumpsuit from Vault 77 can be found in Fallout 3, in the Paradise Falls slaver camp, next to a holotape urging someone to burn it. The man who wore it is never seen, only referenced in whispered terms. Vault 87 inches. The capital wasteland was the site of forced evolutionary virus experiments, the biological weapon that created the super mutants. The people who went into Vault 87 believing they were being saved were transformed into enormous green humanoid creatures with minimal intelligence and enormous strength, and then set loose in the tunnels and eventually the surrounding wasteland. They had no memory of their previous lives. They did not know what had been done to them. Vault 87 is one of the most difficult areas in Fallout 3. flooded with super mutants who are, in a very real and tragic sense, the victims of the facility they inhabit. Vault 92 inches, the Capital Wasteland, was designed to house the finest musicians in America, ostensibly to preserve musical culture during the nuclear war. The real experiment involved white noise piped through the ventilation system sound frequencies designed to trigger aggression in the residents. The vault's logs record the slow deterioration of the population. The musicians began having nightmares. Then, episodes of violence. Then, the violence became uncontrollable. Vault 92 ended in a massacre. When the lone wanderer finds it in Fallout 3, almost everyone inside is dead or feral. Vault 101 inches, the Capital Wasteland, was designed never to open. Not to be opened after a certain period. Not to be opened when conditions were right, never. The doors were designed to stay shut forever. The experiment was about the role of the overseer as an authority figure in a sealed society, and about what happened to human beings when the entire external world was removed from their consciousness. Vault 101's population, after multiple generations, genuinely believed that the vault was the entirety of existence. They had no frame of reference for anything outside. Children were raised in that belief. It passed from generation to generation like religion. The overseer knew the truth. The overseer always knew. And the power that knowledge gave them was the point. Vault 106 pumped psychoactive drugs into the air filtration system 10 days after sealing. The residents were never told. They began experiencing hallucinations, paranoia, and behavioral changes without understanding why. The long-term survivors of Vault 106 that the lone wanderer encounters in Fallout 3 are feral, violently psychotic, barely recognizable as human anymore. Decades of involuntary drug exposure had destroyed them. Vault 11 might be the cruelest of all of them. Its experiment required the inhabitants to sacrifice one person per year. They were told by the Vault's automated systems that if they failed to make the annual sacrifice, everyone in the Vault would be killed. For years, they complied. They held votes. They argued. They made their choices. People died who did not have to die, because everyone believed the alternative was worse. The experiment continued until the population had dwindled to 5 survivors. Those 5 people finally refused to sacrifice any more of their number. They expected to die. Instead, the automated voice told them that the annual sacrifice had never actually been required. It had never been true. They were congratulated. They were told they were shining examples of humanity. The 5 survivors then killed themselves. In Fallout New Vegas, the player can access the computer terminal that recorded all of this. You can read the logs. You can trace the arc from a functioning community to a death pact. The whole tragedy is there in the terminal entries, waiting for anyone who bothers to look. Vault 21 inches. New Vegas was a slightly more benign experiment. All disputes in the vault, from resource allocation to leadership decisions, were settled by gambling. The person who won the game got to decide the outcome. It created a peculiar but relatively stable society, and when the vault opened, several residents went on to work in the casinos of New Vegas. Sarah, the vault's last overseer, ended up running a gift shop inside the sealed vault, which the player can visit. The gambling obsession was real. The people were real. But the vault that shaped them was an experiment. Vault 95 inches, the Commonwealth, was populated with chem-dependent citizens who were promised rehabilitation. For a while, the program worked. Residents were getting clean. Progress was being made. Then a Vault-Tec employee who had been living among them as a plant revealed a hidden stash of chems in the middle of the night. The carefully managed recovery collapsed within days. The experiment was designed to see what would happen when a recovering population was exposed to relapse conditions. What happened was exactly what you would expect. The vault tore itself apart. Vault 75 inches. Massachusetts was a eugenics program. Children were separated from their parents, the parents were executed, and the children were raised in a clinical environment and tested. Those who passed the tests were trained as operatives. Those who didn't were terminated upon reaching the age of 18. The facility that housed Vault 75 was built beneath a school. The parents who put their children in line to enter the vault thought they were giving them a better chance at survival. Vault 111, where the events of Fallout 4 begin, used cryogenic freezing on unsuspecting subjects. The residents were told they would be briefly suspended while the vault was prepared. They were kept frozen for 210 years. Most of them died from a systems failure during that time. The sole survivor, the player character, is one of the few who survived and wakes up in the year 2287 to find everyone they knew is either dead or unrecognizable. The Vault experiments reveal something about the Fallout universe that goes deeper than simple villainy. They suggest that the people who built and managed the vaults genuinely believed they were doing something valuable. The data they were collecting about human resilience, about social collapse, about the limits of authority, and the mechanics of obedience was data they intended to use to build a better post-war civilization. They had convinced themselves that the suffering was worth it, that the math worked out, that you could pour enough cruelty into the machine and get something clean and useful out the other side. That logic, the logic of utility, of ends justifying means, of treating people as instruments toward a larger goal, is the thing Fallout keeps returning to across every game in the series. The Institute in Fallout 4 shares it, the Enclave shares it. Even the Brotherhood of Steel shares a version of it, in their conviction that technology must be controlled and that ordinary people cannot be trusted with the tools they need to rebuild. Every major faction in Fallout is in some way a continuation of the Vault-Tec argument. Everyone is running an experiment on someone. There is one vault that complicates this pattern almost entirely. Vault 81 inches. The Commonwealth was designed to create cures for all of humanity's diseases by experimenting on the vault's residents. The scientists stationed there were meant to infect the dwellers with various conditions and test treatments. But the lead scientist, a doctor named Olivette, could not bring herself to follow through. She sabotaged the program, secretly redirected the research, and protected her residents from experiments they never knew were planned for them. She kept the vault's true purpose hidden for the rest of her life. When the vault opened 100 years after the Great War, it was one of the few functioning, relatively stable communities in the Commonwealth. Vault 81 gives us something the rest of the Vault lore rarely does. A person inside the machine who said no, who decided that individual lives were worth more than institutional goals. It is a small thing, a single decision made in secret, but it meant that hundreds of people lived better lives than Vault-Tec had intended. The smallest acts of decency inside the darkest systems are the ones that matter most. There is also something fascinating about the hierarchy of knowledge within the vaults. The overseer almost always knew the truth. The staff sometimes knew pieces of it, but the residents, the people who had been told they were the lucky ones, the ones who had made it underground before the bombs fell, almost never knew. They lived inside the experiment without ever seeing the frame around it. That is perhaps the deepest horror the vaults contain. Not the violence or the experimentation, but the ordinary life that continued around it. The meals eaten, the children born, the arguments about curfews and work schedules and who left the hydroponics bay in a mess, all of it happening inside a structure built on deception. All of it unfolding in the shadow of a secret the people living it were never meant to learn. The vaults are the best thing in Fallout because they are a complete metaphor. For institutions, for authority, for the way power convinces itself that the cruelty it commits is actually a form of care. Section 3. Who started the Great War? The 23rd of October 2077. At 9:47 inches the morning, Eastern Standard Time, nuclear detonations began across the United States. Within 2 hours, civilization as it existed in the Fallout universe was gone. The Great War both began and ended in a single day. For nearly 30 years, across every game in the series, the question of who started it, who launched the first missile, remained one of the most deliberately ambiguous mysteries in Fallout's lore. The early games never explicitly stated it. They showed the aftermath. They hinted at the geopolitical tension, but they never named the finger on the button. And then, piece by piece, the answers started to come together, from multiple directions at once. The Fallout universe diverges from real history around the 1950s. In the game's timeline, the space race did not lead to a digital revolution. Transistor technology developed differently. The world of Fallout arrived at the 21st century with atomic power everywhere and computers that still used vacuum tubes and magnetic tape. The aesthetic of the 1950s simply continued forward, becoming the aesthetic of the 2070s, while the world ran out of the resources that had built it. The conflict at the center of the Great War was a resource war between the United States and China. Petroleum and uranium, the fuels that powered this retro-futuristic world, were running out. The resource wars began in the 2050s with conflicts in the Middle East. By the 2060s, the United States and China were in direct military conflict over the last significant oil fields in Alaska. American forces occupied Anchorage in 2059. A decade of brutal winter warfare followed. It was during this period that the United States military began developing a biological weapon. The forced evolutionary virus, FEV, was supposed to be a medical marvel, a virus that caused rapid, accelerated human evolution rather than disease. The weapon's application was something else, a biological agent that could be used against enemy populations. China found out. They demanded the United States stop. The United States agreed, then moved the program to a different location and kept going. Tim Kaine, the creator of the original Fallout, speaking in an interview in 2023, said this explicitly. He said, "The reason we got nuked is bioweapons were illegal, and somehow China found out we were doing FEV. And they were like, you have to stop it. And we went, okay, but all we did is move it." According to Kaine's account, it was China that launched the first nuclear strikes in retaliation for America's continued biological weapons development. China fired first because America refused to be honest about what it was building in its laboratories. The forced evolutionary virus, the same substance that created the super mutants of the capital wasteland, the same technology that the Institute would later corrupt into synthetic humans, was the reason the world ended. That is the story from Fallout's original creator. But canon has grown more complicated since then. The Fallout TV series on Amazon Prime, which Bethesda has confirmed is part of the official franchise canon, adds a layer to this story that changes the picture significantly. In the Season 1 finale, a flashback reveals a meeting between senior Vault-Tec executives and representatives from several powerful pre-war corporations, Robco, Westtech, Big MT, and Repcon among them. At this meeting, a Vault-Tec executive named Barb Howard suggests that Vault-Tec could simply drop the first bombs themselves. If the war was coming anyway, why not control when it started? Why not be the ones who triggered it, and therefore be the ones who had prepared for it? The moment is staggering in its implications. For 27 years, the apocalypse of Fallout was a war between nations, a geopolitical collapse, something that happened to everyone equally. The TV show reframes it as something that might have been engineered by a corporation seeking competitive advantage in a world after the bombs. But Season 2 of the show complicates this further still. Mr. House, the enigmatic pre-war genius and post-war ruler of New Vegas, is shown in Season 2, dismissing the idea that Vault-Tec had the capacity to actually pull the trigger on the Great War. He did not believe anyone in that room would be the ones responsible. He suspected other players were involved. And crucially, it is revealed that Barb Howard did not arrive at the idea of corporate-initiated apocalypse on her own. She had been pressured into making the suggestion by a representative of the Enclave, the remnants of the pre-war U.S. government operating in the shadows who threatened her family if she refused to deliver that specific message to the assembled executives. So the full picture, layered across all the canon sources, looks something like this. A secret faction of the American government was already preparing for nuclear war. They were managing the Vault-Tec program behind the scenes, shaping it toward their own goals. They manipulated Vault-Tec's leadership into discussing and possibly planning a first strike. Meanwhile, China was preparing to retaliate for the ongoing FEV program. And on the 23rd of October 2077, unknown submarines were detected off the California coast at 3 minutes past midnight. Who they belong to has never been definitively established. The Great War remains the longest unresolved mystery in Fallout lore. It is, deliberately, a crime scene without a full chain of evidence. Every faction that survived the war claims it was someone else's fault. Every terminal entry that gets close to the truth is incomplete, damaged, or corrupted. The ambiguity is a feature of the design, not an oversight. Fallout's world is built on the idea that the causes of great disasters are always murkier than the clean narratives we construct around them. Unknown submersible objects were sighted off California at 12:03 inches the morning. Radar contacts were reported across the eastern seaboard. Missiles appeared on tracking screens, and then everything happened very fast. And within a day, it was over in the worst possible way. Nobody had time to make sure of anything. Nobody had time to ask who went first. There was just the light. The Enclave, the secret continuation of the U.S. government, retreated to a decommissioned oil rig off California's coast when the war began. Their plan had been to outlast the catastrophe and then reclaim a world cleared of its inconvenient complications. But the destruction was worse than they had anticipated, and their communications between bunkers fragmented, and the Enclave splintered into isolated cells pursuing their own interpretations of the mission. In Appalachia, the setting of Fallout 76, a former Secretary of Agriculture named Thomas Eckhart went so far as to try to launch additional nuclear strikes against China after the Great War had already ended. He wanted to finish the job. His actions in pursuit of that goal caused the Scorched Plague, a catastrophic disease that nearly wiped out all human life in the region. A man trying to extend a war that was already over, ending up causing a second, smaller apocalypse in the same territory. Some of the most interesting Great War lore lives in the mundane details. On the 23rd of October 2077, the day the bombs fell, the US and China were technically in a period of diplomatic negotiation. Talks had collapsed that morning in Anchorage. By 9:47 inches the morning Eastern Standard Time, the first detonations were registered. Between the collapse of talks and the first strike was less than 10 hours. Whatever pushed the situation over that edge happened with extraordinary speed. The pre-war world's propaganda had been working overtime to maintain the fiction of normalcy right up to the end. Nuka-Cola commercials played on television. Vault-Tec ran advertisements. Products were being sold. People were going to work. There were birthday parties. The Fallout TV show opens at one of them, Cooper Howard, a pre-war movie star, attending his daughter's birthday party, watching the news out of the corner of his eye, seeing the president being taken to a secret location, watching a weatherman joke that his job had become pointless, and then going outside and watching the sky turn orange. The juxtaposition of ordinary domestic life and world-ending catastrophe is where Fallout's emotional power lies. The Great War is not just a backdrop. It is the hinge point around which the entire moral universe of the franchise turns. Everything that happens in every game, every decision made by every faction, every experiment in every vault, all of it is downstream of those few hours on a single October Saturday. Who started it? Everyone. No one. A company that wanted to be first. A government that refused to stop building weapons it had promised to stop building. A nation that ran out of patience. A shadowy apparatus that saw opportunity in the end of the world. The truth of the Great War is that there is no clean answer, and Fallout has always known that the absence of a clean answer is the most honest thing it can offer. War, as Ron Perlman has told us with extraordinary regularity, never changes. And one of the things that never changes about war is that the people who start them rarely describe themselves as the ones who started them. The wasteland is the inheritance of that. The vaults are the monument to it. And the people living and dying and building and burning in the ruins 200 years later are still, in various ways, fighting about whose fault it was. Section 4. The Capital Wasteland's Darkest Corners. Washington, D.C., in the year 2277, is one of the most carefully observed post-apocalyptic environments in video game history. Every crumbling building, every rusted monument, every rain-gray stretch of irradiated wasteland between the landmarks of American civic life, it was designed to feel like history under glass. A civilization frozen at the moment of its destruction and then left to slowly dissolve. Fallout 3 is where the modern Fallout story begins for most people. Released in 2008, it was the first game under Bethesda's stewardship, and it made the series what it is now. A first-person open-world RPG in which hundreds of hours could disappear into exploration. The Capital Wasteland was enormous, it was dense, and it was absolutely riddled with secrets that most players never found. Let's begin with the McClellan House. Joel Burgess, one of Fallout 3's developers, has said in interviews that the McClellan House was the Easter egg he was most proud of in the entire game. It is located in a ruined suburb, and at first glance it looks like any other pre-war home: collapsed roof, scattered furniture, the traces of a life that ended quickly. But if you know what to look for, the McClellan House is a very specific tribute to the writer Ray Bradbury, and in particular to a story from his Martian Chronicles collection called There Will Come Soft Rains. Bradbury's story is about an automated house that keeps functioning after a nuclear war has killed its owners. The house makes breakfast. It reads poetry. It carries out the routines of domestic life with no one left to observe them. It is one of the most haunting pieces of science fiction ever written. In the McClellan house in Fallout 3, a Mr. Handy robot still tends the home. If you stay long enough, the robot reads a poem to the tiny skeletons in the children's bedroom. The poem is the same one from Bradbury's story There Will Come Soft Rains by Sarah Teasdale, a World War I-era poem about nature continuing after humanity destroys itself. The family name is McClellan, matching the address from Bradbury's story. There is a dead dog outside. The robot continues its routines with no family left to serve. It is all there for anyone who knows to look, and invisible to anyone who doesn't. That is the kind of layered design that makes Fallout's world feel like something built by people who genuinely loved literature, not just game mechanics. The capital wasteland is full of stories told through environments rather than dialogue. Out on the edges of the map, far from any quest marker, there are locations that exist purely to be discovered. The developer Easter egg that lives outside the normal boundary of gameplay, a guard on a hidden platform, who, if you find him using the PC console's no-clip command, immediately starts asking you questions about how you managed to get there. He has full dialogue. Someone wrote and recorded lines for a character that could only be reached by cheating, because someone thought it was funny. The radio towers scattered across the wasteland each broadcast a unique Morse code signal. Follow the signal and you find a supply cache. But two of the towers hide something more disturbing. One broadcasts a father's voice, recorded on a ham radio, a man trying to reach help, asking if anyone can send medicine for his sick son. When you trace the signal to its source, you find he is dead. Nobody ever responded. The message has been broadcasting to silence for an unknown period of time. The second broadcasts only gurgling sounds and moaning, which turn out to be the audio of feral ghouls who have gathered near the transmitting equipment. Neither of these locations has a quest attached. There is no marker on your map. There is no reward beyond the loot in the cache and the lore that accumulates around them. They are ghost stories told in code. Vault 108 is called Gary's Vault by players, and the reason is one of the bleaker forms of dark comedy in the series. The vault was designed with the opposite of most vaults. It had 3 times the normal number of weapons and half the normal amount of food. The experiment was to observe how the population managed scarcity of resources when well armed. The population did not manage it well. Eventually, a cloning experiment produced multiple copies of a man named Gary. Not Gary's personality, just his body and his single remaining cognitive function, which was the ability to say the word Gary. When the lone wanderer enters Vault 108, every single occupant is a Gary clone. They can only say Gary. They will say it while attacking you. Gary, Gary, Gary. The vault devolved from whatever social catastrophe the weapons and hunger experiment caused into a facility populated entirely by a man who can only say his own name, repeated endlessly in dozens of identical copies. The original Gary is somewhere in there. He was a terrible person before he was cloned. The terminal entries make this clear. Beyond the edges of the official map, in a location that takes careful navigating to reach, there is Isabella Proud's camp. She was a researcher who went out beyond the marked areas alone, looking for something. Her notes document increasingly desperate scientific observations. The ghouls and the radiation caught up with her before she could finish what she started. Her camp sits in a pond past the edges of the world that most players ever see, and it exists only to tell a story about one person's last weeks. The crashed UFO is perhaps Fallout 3's most famous secret. To the northwest of a small cluster of clifftop shacks, a crashed alien spacecraft can be found, and near it, the body of the pilot. Looting the pilot gives you an alien blaster. The DLC Mothership Zeta eventually expanded this into a full quest involving the aliens abducting the lone wanderer and several other survivors, including a medieval knight and a World War II soldier, for a series of experiments. The aliens had been watching Earth since long before the Great War. They had people they considered interesting on board. What they found interesting about those people is never fully explained. In Fallout 3, there is a place called the Republic of Dave. It is tucked away in the far northeast corner of the capital wasteland, and it is run by a man named Dave, who has declared himself president of a tiny settlement. He holds elections. He is the only candidate. He campaigns among his own small household. If you help him win, which he will do regardless, he gives you 25 bottle caps as a reward. The Republic of Dave is a joke that isn't quite a joke, and it lands differently depending on what year you're playing Fallout 3 inches. There is a Bethesda Underworks, an underground area accessible via a metro station northeast of the Bethesda East office. It is named after the studio that made the game. It is full of enemies. Someone at Bethesda wanted their name to appear on a dungeon crawl. The Vault-77 jumpsuit in Paradise Falls, the one with the holotape urging the slavers to burn it, ties into the Penny Arcade webcomic that Bethesda considered canon. The Puppet Man is never seen. He is only rumored, only feared, only referenced in the nervous instructions left by someone who clearly believed the stories about him. A piece of official lore from a webcomic, referenced by a single item and a holotape, that most players walked past without reading. The Capital Wasteland's treatment of its fictional history goes very deep. The Lincoln Memorial in this timeline has been taken over by slavers who have defaced the Lincoln statue. Freeing it, helping the escaped slaves use it as a safe house, is an optional questline. The game never tells you what to think about this. It shows you the defaced memorial and waits. The Dunwich building in Fallout 3 is a place most players found deeply unsettling without being able to explain why. It is full of standard enemies, feral ghouls, and yet it produces a sense of dread that the more dangerous areas of the game don't quite match. Players reported hearing whispered voices inside. The building itself was named after H.P. Lovecraft's story, The Dunwich Horror. The whispers are real. They are in the game's audio files. Something in the design of that particular space was built to be wrong in a way that isn't immediately definable. Bethesda would revisit this with Dunwich Borers in Fallout 4, going further into the Lovecraftian direction. Vault 112 inches. Fallout 3 is one of the strangest vaults in the series. Its residents were placed in pods and connected to a virtual reality simulation, a fabricated 1950s suburb called Tranquility Lane, where a man named Dr. Stanislaus Braun played out his cruelties with absolute authority. Braun had been running the simulation for 200 years, keeping the residents in a dream of normalcy while subjecting them to periodic horrors, then resetting them and starting again. When the lone wanderer enters Tranquility Lane to retrieve their father, they have to navigate Braun's games, complete his tasks, or find another way through. The simulated suburb has a secret. There is a configuration terminal hidden inside the abandoned house, accessible only by pressing certain garden ornaments in the correct sequence. It will activate an emergency failsafe that Braun's superiors built into the simulation, a way to end the experiment and reset it completely. Using it kills every resident of the simulation instantly, permanently. The game awards the same outcome either way. You get your father and you leave. But the knowledge that there was a kill switch hidden in the dream, installed by the people who built the machine as a contingency against exactly this kind of abuse, changes the texture of the whole thing. Fallout 3 Point Lookout DLC added a swamp landscape off the coast of the Capital Wasteland that functions like a fever dream. The bayou is already strange before you start learning its secrets. There is a plantation. There is a deeply unsettling carnival. There is a character called the Desmond who has been alive since before the Great War and has no good explanation for it. Point Lookout was where Fallout 3 went fully gothic, and it did so without ever quite explaining what was wrong with the place. Some questions in the Wasteland are intended to stay open. The sheer volume of readable material in Fallout 3 is one of the things that separates it from other open-world games. Every terminal has entries. Every holotape has a story. The books and magazines scattered across the Wasteland have names and descriptions. Bethesda built a civilization's worth of written material into the game, most of which the average player will never find. The story of the Capital Wasteland is told in layers. The big, dramatic quests at the surface, the environmental storytelling in the ruins, and then beneath that, in the terminals and the holotapes and the scraps of paper, the small personal histories of people who didn't survive to tell them. The McClellan House robot keeps reading its poem. The Morse code towers keep broadcasting. Isabella Proud's notes keep sitting in their waterlogged camp at the edge of the map. Vault 77's jumpsuit keeps waiting in the back of a slaver's stash for someone who knows what it means. The Capital Wasteland was designed to reward patience, to reward curiosity, to make it worth stopping and reading the terminal in the room you already looted, just in case. Section 5. Bethesda takes the helm. The story of Bethesda's relationship with Fallout begins, as we have established, with a stolen disc and a man who never gave it back to his brother. But the internal story of how Fallout 3 came together is full of its own particular tension and uncertainty. When Bethesda announced in 2004 that it had acquired the Fallout license, the reaction from the franchise's existing fanbase was complicated. Fallout's loyal players gathered in communities like No Mutants Allowed, a forum whose name was a direct reference to Fallout 2's most toxic zone, were protective of what they considered the soul of the series. The original games were isometric turn-based RPGs. They were deeply literary. They were hard. They did not hold your hand. The idea of Bethesda, the company known for first-person open-world RPGs like Morrowind and Oblivion, taking that legacy and moving it into 3 dimensions and real-time combat was, for a significant portion of the fan base, a reason to worry. Todd Howard was aware of this. In a forum post he wrote during Fallout 3's development, his first forum post since 2004, he noted, somewhat sheepishly, he said he had heard from ex-developers, press people, and fans about what made Fallout special and what they wanted from a new one. He described the variety of opinions as varying a lot, but he said they all ended the same way, like a stern father, pausing for effect but do not screw it up. Howard understood the weight of the inheritance. He didn't pretend it wasn't there. Some details about Fallout 3's development have a particular personal quality that reveals how much of the game was made by people pouring actual pieces of themselves into the work. Todd Howard's infant son, Jake, voiced the lone wanderer as a baby during the birthday sequence that opens the game. The player character, the person who will eventually walk the capital wasteland alone, is first heard as Howard's own child crying in a simulation. Bethesda's original plan for Fallout 3's DC Metro system was to have it cover the entire map, providing an underground transport network that connected all of Washington's major landmarks. Then someone on the team pointed out that actually navigating through miles of metro tunnels to get places would be slow and not very fun. Being realistic sometimes isn't fun, as one developer put it. The metro system was scaled back considerably. What remained was still impressively large and deeply atmospheric, but it was originally imagined as a practical transport solution that tested badly. The development of Fallout 3's visual language, the retro-futurist aesthetic that had been established by Kane and Boyarsky in the original game, required Bethesda to absorb and extend a world they hadn't built. The signature look of Vault-Tec's facilities, the design of the power armor, the style of the Pip-Boy, all of it had been established in 2D isometric form and now needed to exist as 3-dimensional objects that players would see from every angle in real time. The power armor in particular had been designed for the original Fallout by Leonard Boyarsky, who said he was partly inspired by the film The City of Lost Children. Its tubing and vents gave him the template for something industrial and hardcore mechanical. Bethesda took that design and made it something you could wear, something that had weight and presence in 3 dimensions. The decision to make Fallout 3 a first-person RPG was controversial but not random. Bethesda had built their reputation in that format. They knew how to make those games. They knew how to create the sense of inhabiting a space that first-person perspective provides. And there was something about standing in the middle of a ruined Washington, D.C., and being able to look up at a damaged Washington monument against a gray sky that would have been different, lesser, in isometric view. The shift in perspective changed what Fallout was, and made it accessible to a generation of players who would never have tried an isometric turn-based RPG. Todd Howard has talked extensively about the philosophy behind Bethesda's RPGs in the years since. The guiding principle is living in another world, not just visiting it, not just navigating it toward plot objectives, but actually inhabiting it for a period of time. The moment that converts a player into a Bethesda loyalist, he has said, is usually some quiet moment of discovery, standing on a mountain, finding a location nobody pointed you toward, reading a terminal entry that wasn't part of any quest, the sense that the world exists independently of your presence in it. Fallout 3 deliberately established a tradition of Bethesda developer Easter eggs that would continue through Fallout 4 and beyond. The Bethesda Underworks, named after the studio, is an underground area that exists purely because someone thought it would be fun to put their employer's name on a dungeon. In Fallout 4, a painting in the Commonwealth depicts Todd Howard dressed as Napoleon Bonaparte on horseback, rendered in the retro-futurist art style of the game world. Someone on Bethesda's art team put their studio head on a horse in a painting and hid it inside their game. Howard may or may not have known it was there. The fact that it might have slipped past him is part of what makes it perfect. The Rockville Slugger weapon in Fallout 4 is named after Rockville, Maryland, the current location of Bethesda Game Studios. The Liberty Bell-inspired weapon found in certain locations reflects the Boston setting's historical context. When the Brotherhood of Steel Scribes have the Lone Wanderer gather components in Fallout 4, one of those components, a flux sensor, has a serial number engraved on it. CM88B180924609. That is the registry number of the Nostromo, the spacecraft from the 1979 film Alien. The item appears to be a Back to the Future reference, and it is, but the serial number is a second, quieter reference to a different film entirely. These are the kinds of details that require someone to both know the reference and have the access to put it in the game. Multiple people approved it. It exists now in the wasteland, waiting. Bethesda's acquisition of Fallout led, eventually, to the hiring of some of the original Black Isle talent. Emile Pagliarulo, who would become Bethesda's design director, was deeply protective of the franchise's lore and continuity. In the years after the TV show premiered, Pagliarulo would go on Twitter to post a Fallout timeline, confirming the canon status of multiple games, including New Vegas, in response to fan concerns about whether the show had contradicted or erased earlier lore. His insistence that New Vegas was still canon, that the timeline was intact, reflected how seriously the team at Bethesda considered its stewardship of an inheritance that predated their involvement with it. When Fallout 76 launched in 2018, it was a troubled release. The game's online-only structure was unpopular. There were technical issues. There was controversy over the quality of a collector's edition canvas bag. Howard, speaking at a Reddit AMA in 2021, acknowledged the damage directly. He said Bethesda had let people down and had been able to learn and be better from it. He described the game 3 years later as one of their most played, with 11 million players having made it into an incredible community. He said it made them much better developers in the end. There is something honest in that progression. Not denial, not spin, just acknowledgement, followed by the work of fixing it. Fallout 76 Inches 2024 and 2025 is a meaningfully different product from Fallout 76 at launch. The story content has been expanded, the world has been developed. The community that grew around it, despite the rough beginning, is genuinely passionate about the experience. Fallout 4, released in November 2015, was the fullest expression of Bethesda's Fallout vision. Set in the Commonwealth, a post-apocalyptic version of the greater Boston area, it introduced settlement building, an expanded crafting system, and a protagonist with a spoken voice and an established identity. The sole survivor had a life before the bombs fell. A spouse, a child, a neighborhood. And then they woke up in 2287 to find all of it either dead or transformed beyond recognition. The sole survivor has been frozen for 210 years. The child they were trying to protect when the bombs fell has become, in their absence, the head of the most powerful and most morally complex faction in the Commonwealth. When Fallout 4 asks you to find your son, it is doing something Fallout 3 also did, placing a very personal, very human motivation at the center of an enormous and abstract geopolitical conflict. It is always personal in Fallout. The Vault Dwellers' home vault forced them out. The Lone Wanderer's father disappeared. The courier was shot in the head and left in a grave. The sole survivor lost their whole world in a single morning. Every protagonist has a wound that is also a reason to move. Section 6. The Mojave's Untold Secrets. Fallout New Vegas was made in 18 months. Obsidian Entertainment, founded by former Black Isle employees, people who had built or worked adjacent to the original games, was given a year and a half to create a full open-world RPG in the Fallout universe using Bethesda's tools and engine in a new location. 18 months is an almost comically short development window for a project of that scale. It shows in some ways. New Vegas launched in October 2010 Inches, a notoriously buggy state. Crashes were common. Quests broke. The game's engine, inherited from Fallout 3, was not entirely suited to the particular demands of what Obsidian was trying to build. Some features that were planned had to be cut and cut late. But the finished game that emerged from those constraints is widely considered one of the finest RPGs ever made. The writing is extraordinary. The faction system is genuinely complex. The Mojave Wasteland has personality and regional specificity and historical texture that makes it feel like a real place. A real place that happens to be full of radiation and danger and neon lights and a singular, magnificent casino city at its center. The development of New Vegas created lore that deepened the entire franchise, and it created secrets and cut content that players are still uncovering. The most significant piece of cut content in the game's history is a companion character named Ulysses. He was supposed to be in the main game. He was removed approximately 2 months before the game went gold because his inclusion took up too much space and the team ran out of time to fully realize him. His presence is scattered across the game's files like a ghost references to him in dialogue. A quest tag with his name attached to an encounter at Wolfhorn Ranch. Pieces of a character who almost made it into the world. Obsidian recycled him brilliantly. Ulysses became the central figure of Lonesome Road, the game's final DLC, a deeply philosophical encounter between the courier and the one person who, before the events of the game, had refused to deliver the package that led to the courier being shot and buried. Lonesome Road is arguably the most lore-dense and narratively ambitious DLC in any Fallout game. Ulysses became something richer in that form than he might have been as a standard companion, but the fact that he was almost someone you could take with you on the whole journey changes the feeling of the main game slightly, once you know. There was supposed to be a post-game in New Vegas. After the Battle of Hoover Dam, the climactic conflict that ends the main story, Obsidian had planned content that would let players experience the Mojave under whoever had won the battle. NPCs would have commented on the outcome. New quests would have appeared. The consequences of the players' choices would have played out in the world they had helped shape. This was cut entirely due to time constraints. The absence of this post-game is one of the most discussed disappointments in New Vegas's history. The game ends with the battle and then a slideshow, the same structure as the original Fallout games, narrated by Ron Perlman, showing you in brief what happened to each major character and location based on your choices. It is effective, and it respects the tradition. But the world after the dam was something players wanted to inhabit, not just hear described. Ron Perlman's narrator character exists as a physical model in the game's files. If you use console commands to enter the ending slideshow sequence, you can find him there. Ron the narrator wearing Legion armor, standing in a test room that players were never meant to see. He is a detail that exists only because it was technically necessary to create him to record his voice, and then someone in the engine needed to give him a body, and the body never got removed from the build. New Vegas has Morse code hidden in unexpected places. It has film references tucked into corners of the map. It has in-game jokes that only work if you have played previous Fallout games. Near Nipton, if the player character has the Wild Wasteland perk, a trait that makes the game weirder and stranger, they find the charred remains of 2 skeletons named Baru and Owen, positioned identically to the scene from Star Wars, where Luke Skywalker finds his adopted parents killed by Imperial troops. The same perk enables an encounter with men in black suits and sunglasses pursuing a flying saucer that crashed in the Mojave. Wild Wasteland was a way for Obsidian to put their strange, comedic, pop culture-saturated ideas into the game without forcing them on players who wanted a more serious experience. You opt into it at character creation. But Josh Sawyer, who directed the game, later said that making it an opt-in trait was probably a mistake, because players who loved that kind of content would always choose it, and some players who didn't would never see any of it. The game director J.E. Sawyer wrote and performed several of the songs that appear in the game's in-world musical performances, Cobwebs and Rainbows, Home on the Wastes, New Vegas Valley, and Streets of New Reno. If the player completes the talent pool quest for a character named Tommy Turini, they can hear these songs performed at the Aces Theater in the Tops Casino. The songs exist in the world as the work of an in-game character called the Lonesome Drifter. They were actually written and sung by the game's director, speaking through a fictional character to be heard in a fictional casino about a world that never existed. The late Chris Avallone, one of the most celebrated RPG writers of his generation and a major contributor to New Vegas's writing, wrote the lyrics for a song called Begin Again that appears in the game's Dead Money DLC. The song plays near Vera K's hologram in the Sierra Madre, a pre-war casino that has been sealed for 200 years and is now surrounded by a toxic cloud that kills anyone who breathes it. Begin Again is a haunting, melancholy piece about the end of something and the possibility just the possibility of what comes after. Many players never hear it, because the conditions for it to play are specific enough to be easy to miss. The Sierra Madre and the Dead Money DLC as a whole represent some of the darkest and most philosophically pointed storytelling in the franchise. The DLC is about a group of people each broken in their own way, each carrying something they cannot put down trying to extract treasure from an impossible place. The treasure, when they reach it, is not what any of them imagined. One character cannot stop going back in. The story of the Sierra Madre is a story about addiction, about the things we cannot let go even when holding on to them is killing us. The casino's automated advertisement jingle, "Come to the Sierra Madre," will keep the light on for you plays on loop in areas the player traverses, cheerful and welcoming, a voice from a world that ended, telling you that everything is fine, come inside. The NCR Ranger, who can be found at the Southern Nevada Wind Farm, the dead Mr. House that players can discover at the end of a particularly obscure side quest chain, the way that every faction in New Vegas has a logic to it that makes complete sense from inside its own worldview. These are all products of the careful, compressed, intense development process that Obsidian forced out of itself in 18 months. There is a detail about the hacking minigame in New Vegas that connects it specifically to the real world. In Fallout 3 and New Vegas, hacking terminals involves a word puzzle. You see rows of symbols and words. You try words. The game tells you how many letters are in the right position, and you work backward to identify the password. Players who knew the Fallout TV show would later recognize this mechanic when they saw Norm MacLean hacking into the Overseer's terminal in Season 1. The show reproduced the actual in-game interface, the actual puzzle, because it was committed to authenticity. What many players don't know is that the hacking minigame has a specific real-world precedent. The word comparison mechanic is based on a logic puzzle called Mastermind, in which you guess a code and receive feedback about how many elements are correct and in the correct position. It is a standard deduction game. Obsidian ported it into a universe where it became the way you get past a computer, and it worked so well that the image of that terminal screen, the green text, the scrolling symbols, the word list became one of the most recognizable visual elements of the franchise. Vault 11 inches. New Vegas is, as mentioned earlier, the vault that required annual sacrifices. The full story of what happened there can only be assembled by reading every terminal entry in the vault, piecing together decades of horror from fragmented logs. The final entry is from the 5 survivors. After the automated voice congratulates them, they record their response. They record that they have decided to refuse the final order, whatever that order would have been, and to end things on their own terms. They sign the entry. They are gone. That terminal entry hit people when it came out, and it still hits people now. It is perhaps the best example in the franchise of the way Fallout uses completely optional, completely missable content to tell stories that are more emotionally resonant than most of what the main quest manages. You do not have to find Vault 11. You do not have to read every terminal, and if you do, there is no reward beyond the story itself. Some of the most interesting New Vegas developer secrets have nothing to do with the game's content and everything to do with its production. Obsidian discovered during development that they had used an image of the Rorschach test, the psychological inkblot evaluation, in some promotional material or in-game content. The owners of the Rorschach test came to Bethesda and said, according to a developer's account, they were going to have a fun lawsuit on their hands, so they'd better sort it out. The image was removed. This is the kind of legal obstacle that game development regularly encounters and almost never acknowledges publicly. The beta build of New Vegas, discovered in a Utah game store in November 2025, when 2 development kits from Obsidian were found on a shelf at a small secondhand shop, revealed a version of the game close to, but meaningfully different from the final release. In that build, the Las Vegas Strip had no walls dividing it into 3 separate sections. The walls were added for performance optimization. Their absence in the beta makes the Strip feel more like a real stretch of street, and more overwhelming, and perhaps less functional. The walls were a concession to the technology of the era. The spirit of the design was something larger than the hardware could sustain. Section 7. The Commonwealth's Hidden Layers. The ruins of Greater Boston in the year 2287 contain an extraordinary number of secrets per square mile. Fallout 4's Commonwealth is a place where practically every building has something worth investigating, where the environmental storytelling rewards players who slow down and look carefully, and where the developers embedded a remarkable density of film and literature references into the fabric of the world. The Dunwich Borers in the northeast of the Commonwealth is one of the strangest and most deliberately unsettling locations in the game. It appears to be a quarry, an industrial pit with extraction equipment, a bobblehead, a magazine, and a workable mine beneath. But the deeper you go into that mine, the stranger it gets. Visions start appearing. The atmosphere becomes incorrect in a way that is hard to articulate. The name is a reference to H.P. Lovecraft's novella The Dunwich Horror, and the location functions as Bethesda's most explicit Lovecraft tribute in the franchise. There is something old in the bottom of that quarry, something that was there before the Great War. Players who go all the way to the bottom find evidence of pre-war excavation people who were digging in the wrong place and found something that should have been left buried. Near a shipwreck at Oberlin Station, there is a skeleton in a blue jacket and bandana lying next to a mutant dolphin. Beneath the boat is a shark cage. The entire scene is arranged identically to the death of Quint in the 1975 Steven Spielberg film Jaws. The machete is there, the dolphin is in the water, everything is where it should be. The Far Harbor DLC contains another film reference in the same spirit, two corpses floating in water, positioned identically to the iconic shot of Jack and Rose in James Cameron's Titanic. The Prost Bar is a bar in the Commonwealth's Beacon Hill neighborhood, and its interior is modeled on the real bar from the 1980s sitcom Cheers, which was itself modeled on a real Boston bar. Prost is German for cheers. The bar has baseball memorabilia. There are two skeletons in poses that match recurring patrons from the show. The irony of a zombie apocalypse bar where everybody knows your name has not been lost on anyone who has found it. Power Noodles in Diamond City is run by a Japanese robot named Takahashi, whose single line of dialogue is Nanni Shimashoka, an imperfect Japanese phrase, meaning, "What would you like to have?" It is the exact phrase, including the grammatical imperfection, as the one spoken by the noodle seller in Ridley Scott's Blade Runner. Diamond City is built inside Fenway Park, the real home stadium of the Boston Red Sox, and the team's Green Monster, the park's famous left field wall, is visible in the game's geography. When you use a scope to look at the stands surrounding Diamond City, you can see the details of the real stadium reproduced in the design. The flux sensor that Scribe Halen asks the sole survivor to recover for the Brotherhood of Steel has the serial number CM88B180924609 engraved on it. As mentioned earlier, this is the registry number of the Nostromo from the 1979 film Alien. The item is also a reference to Back to the Future's flux capacitor. The combination makes it a double reference, two films in a single inventory item. At Walden Pond in the Commonwealth, players can find a tribute to Henry David Thoreau, a small cabin near the water, where the philosopher-writer lived for 2 years in the 19th century, in an experiment in deliberate simplicity that became the basis for his most famous work. The in-game cabin is stripped down to nearly nothing: a bed, a few chairs, a fireplace with bourbon on it. A speaker plays information about Thoreau's life. In a world full of ruins and decay, someone built a monument to a man who voluntarily simplified his own existence, and the juxtaposition makes both the monument and the ruins feel differently weighted. The Pickman Gallery in Goodneighbor is a location whose horror accumulates slowly. The gallery appears to be an art studio, a series of rooms with paintings on the walls. The paintings become more disturbing the further in you go. Some are made of materials that shouldn't be used in painting. At the deepest level, you find the artist himself, a man named Pickman, whose work is rooted in a very specific kind of violence. He is a reference to a Lovecraft story called Pickman's Model, in which an artist paints horrifying creatures from life because the creatures are real. In the Commonwealth, Pickman is fighting raiders when you find him. He is arguably doing something useful. The moral of the Pickman Gallery is deliberately unclear. There is a hidden alien encounter in Fallout 4 that involves watching a UFO streak across the sky and then following the smoke trail to a crash site. The pilot of the ship survives the crash and attacks on site. It is hostile. You can kill it and take its alien blaster. The encounter is completely unmarked. There is no quest compass pointing toward it. It just happens in the world, and if you see the light in the sky and go toward it, you find one of the stranger corners of the Commonwealth. The Institute, the secretive underground scientific organization that serves as Fallout 4's primary antagonist, was first hinted at in Fallout 3's side quest, The Replicated Man, set in Rivet City. The quest involved an android who had escaped from an organization that built synthetic humans and was trying to establish a new identity in the wasteland. The Railroad, the secret organization that helps synths escape the Institute, was also hinted at in this quest. By the time Fallout 4 arrived, both the Institute and the Railroad had been building in the background of the franchise for 7 years, waiting for a game set in Boston to make them the center of the story. Dr. Lee, a scientist from Fallout 3 who worked with the Lone Wanderer's father on Project Purity, reappears in Fallout 4 as a researcher working for the Institute. A decade of her life has passed off-screen, and she ended up in the institution she spent much of Fallout 3 running from. If the player works to convince her to defect to the Brotherhood of Steel, she goes. The continuity of her character across 2 games, across a real-time gap of 7 years, is the kind of detail that makes the franchise feel like a continuous world rather than a series of separate stories. The Good Will Hunting reference in Fallout 4 involves a chalkboard in an MIT-adjacent location, a math problem scrawled on a blackboard in the manner of the 1997 film. Someone at Bethesda loved that movie enough to put it inside a post-apocalyptic Boston, in a location where the buildings that housed MIT in real life have become something entirely different. Nick Valentine's case file on the mysterious stranger is perhaps the most charming piece of optional content in the game. The mysterious stranger is a perk that has been present since the original Fallout, a trench-coated gunslinger who occasionally appears to help the player in VATS combat and then vanishes without explanation. No character in any game had ever acknowledged his existence until Fallout 4, where Nick Valentine, an android detective with memories from before the Great War, has apparently been trying to track the stranger down. His notes on the case are stored in a file under his bed. They reveal nothing definitive about who or what the stranger is, but they are written with exactly the tone of a noir detective who has been chasing a ghost for longer than he'd like to admit. Vault 75 beneath Malden Middle School is one of the Commonwealth's most quietly devastating secrets. The exterior looks like a ruined school. Inside, the Vault's experiment involved separating children from their parents. At entry, the parents were executed and raising the children to be operatives for an unspecified purpose. The logs document the cold bureaucratic language of child abduction framed as scientific program management. The children who survived the process were trained. The children who didn't meet the program's standards were processed. The institutional language of the terminals never shifts. It describes terrible things in the language of project management, and the gap between the language and the reality is the horror. Section 8. Faction Lore Deep Dives. The Fallout universe contains some of the most carefully constructed fictional factions in video game history. They are not simply good guys and bad guys. They are groups of people with internally consistent ideologies, each of which looks coherent from the inside and reveals its contradictions from the outside. Understanding what each faction actually believes and where that belief came from is one of the deepest pleasures the series offers. The Brotherhood of Steel begins in California. Its founding story involves a U.S. Army soldier named Roger Maxson who was stationed at the Mariposa military base in 2077 and who discovered what his commanding officers had actually been doing there, injecting soldiers and prisoners with the forced evolutionary virus, the same biological program that China had protested. When the bombs fell and Maxson's chain of command dissolved, he made a decision. He declared himself independent of the United States government. He established a new order among the soldiers and civilians he had under his command. He gave the new order a purpose: the preservation, cataloging, and control of technology. The Brotherhood of Steel is, at its core, a response to the FEV program. It was founded by someone who had discovered what unregulated technology in the hands of government could do. Maxson's logic was that the war had happened because technology had been allowed to develop and proliferate without sufficient oversight. The solution was not to abandon technology, but to control it, to be the ones who decided what technologies existed, who had access to them, and how they were used. This is a reasonable response to a genuine catastrophe. It is also, over generations, the logic that produces an organization that will kill wasteland civilians for possessing pre-war tech they found in a ruin. The Brotherhood's founding principle control technology, Prevent misuse transformed into entitlement to that control, and then into aggression toward anyone who didn't accept the entitlement. The organization that began as a reaction against the abuse of scientific power became something that used its own power to dominate others. The West Coast Brotherhood, encountered in the first Fallout, had become deeply isolationist by 2161. They hoarded their technology. They were suspicious of outsiders. They had largely stopped engaging with the wasteland and were focused entirely on internal preservation. The East Coast Brotherhood in Fallout 3, founded by a man named Owen Lyons, had evolved differently, or, according to other members, had deviated. Lyons had decided the Brotherhood should actually help the people of the capital wasteland, protecting them from super mutants and other threats. This was considered a fundamental betrayal of the Brotherhood's purpose by more traditionalist members. There is a splinter group called the Outcasts in Fallout 3 who broke with Lyons over exactly this question. They believed the Brotherhood's purpose was technology, not humanitarianism, and they refused to be part of what they saw as a distortion of the mission. By Fallout 4, the East Coast Brotherhood had evolved again under Elder Maxon, a descendant of the founder, into something more aggressive and more ideologically rigid than Lyons' version. The Liberty Prime robot, rebuilt and reprogrammed to march on the Institute, is an emblem of this. Enormous, powerful, shouting anti-communist slogans from the pre-war era, utterly convinced of its own righteousness. It is a deliberately absurd image. It is also an image of something genuinely frightening. The Enclave's history is the most complex of any faction in the series. They are the continuation of the U.S. government, the people who evacuated to the oil rig before the bombs fell, who spent 2 centuries in isolation developing their own understanding of what post-war America should look like. Their vision, at its most extreme, involved the elimination of everyone whose genetic material had been contaminated by radiation, everyone who had lived in the wasteland, everyone who had been exposed. Only pure pre-war genetics would qualify as human. Everyone else would be purged. This vision is a grotesque extension of the pre-war logic that created the vaults. The idea that you could measure, test, and categorize humanity into those worth saving and those who should be discarded. The Enclave are not simply villains. They are the logical endpoint of a particular way of thinking about civilization, the idea that purity matters, that impurity must be removed, that a better future requires cleansing the present. The Enclave also believed sincerely that they were the legitimate continuation of American democracy. They had the U.S. government structures. They had a president, they had the flag, they had the language of constitutional authority. What they had done with that authority was a different matter, but they never stopped believing that authority was legitimately theirs. The NCR, the New California Republic, represents a different model of post-war civilization. Founded from the ruins of Vault 15 and the settlement of Shady Sands, it is an attempt to rebuild pre-war democracy. Elections, laws, institutions, expansion. By the time of Fallout New Vegas, the NCR controls a significant portion of California and Nevada, and is the largest organized government in the post-war West. It is also stretched thin, corrupt at its edges, bureaucratic, and willing to commit the same kinds of violence against smaller communities that any empire commits in the name of order and expansion. The NCR is aspirational and compromised simultaneously. It has things worth wanting: stability, rule of law, the idea that people deserve safety, and it achieves them through means that hollow those things out. Rangers who do terrible things in the desert. Policies that hurt the poor communities they nominally protect. The weight of an expanding empire pressing down on people who were managing fine without being managed. Caesar's Legion in New Vegas is a deliberate provocation. A Roman-inspired slave-holding military society built by a man who studied history and decided that the post-war world needed discipline above all else. Caesar, formerly Edward Sallow, spent his pre-Legion years as a traveling linguist and historian, and became convinced that the collapse of American democracy had been caused by the moral chaos of freedom, by the idea that individuals could choose their own values, that society could exist without hierarchy and absolute authority. He built the Legion as his answer to that belief. The Legion is not played for comedy. It is given space to articulate its own logic. Frumentari intelligence operatives speak about the Legion's actual accomplishments. The roads are safe, women can walk alone between Caesar's controlled territories, The old raider gangs have been enslaved and put to work, and no longer prey on travelers. There are things the Legion does that work, by its own grim measurement, and there are things it does that are indefensible and which the game also shows you directly. New Vegas is the game in the franchise that is most interested in what legitimate authority looks like and where it comes from. The NCR has elections and corruption. The Legion has order and slavery. Mr. House has competence and contempt for the people he governs. The player can side with any of them or with none of them, and the game doesn't make the choice easy or consequence-free. The Institute in Fallout 4 is the faction whose internal logic is the most tragic. They are the inheritors of MIT. They build synthetic humans. Their stated purpose is the preservation of scientific knowledge and the long-term survival of humanity. Their actual method is to operate in complete secrecy beneath the earth, replacing people on the surface with synths for reasons that become progressively harder to justify, conducting experiments on the wasteland without the knowledge or consent of anyone above ground. The Institute's scientists genuinely believe what they are doing is right. They have raised children in their underground facility who have never seen the sun and who have been taught that the surface world is beyond saving. They have reduced the people of the Commonwealth to subjects in a study, to be monitored and occasionally interfered with. The tragedy of the Institute is that the intellect that built it was real, the capability was genuine, and the isolation that followed from their choice to go underground distorted everything they built. The railroad, which helps synths escape the Institute, is made up of people who believe that a sufficiently sophisticated artificial mind deserves the same moral consideration as a human mind. It is a minority position. Most people in the Commonwealth are frightened of synths or hostile to them. The railroad's argument is one that the franchise has been quietly making since Fallout 3's replicated ManQuest. If something can feel, if something can fear, if something can form attachments and preferences and a sense of self, at what point does the question of whether it was born or built become irrelevant? Nick Valentine, a synth with the memories of a pre-war detective, built by the Institute but escaped to live and work in Diamond City, is Fallout 4's most compelling argument for the railroad's position. He is not human. He is also, in every meaningful way, a person. He worries. He has regrets. He has a sense of humor and a tendency towards self-deprecation. He is made of components, and he is also someone you would want beside you in the wasteland. The faction lore of Fallout is a set of meditations on the relationship between ideology and outcome, between the stories groups tell about themselves and the things they actually do. Every faction in the series begins with a real problem it is genuinely trying to solve. Every faction's solution creates new problems. The wasteland is the inheritance of the old world's failures, and the factions moving through it are busy creating the failures of the next world. Section 9. The TV show's Easter egg treasure hunt. When Amazon Prime's Fallout television series premiered in April 2024, it arrived as something unusual, a video game adaptation made, unmistakably, by people who had actually played and loved the games. The showrunners Graham Wagner and Geneva Robertson Dwore were genuine fans. Todd Howard served as executive producer. The result was 8 episodes stuffed with references so precise and so layered that dedicated players were still finding things weeks after the initial viewing. The show takes place in 2296, further along the Fallout timeline than any game had previously gone. This meant that all the events of all the games, from the original 1997 entry through Fallout 76, existed in the show's past. It was not a retelling. It was a continuation, in a new medium, set in a new location, built around original characters who were nevertheless walking through a world that millions of people had spent hundreds of hours in. The opening scene is at a birthday party in pre-war California, 2077 the October 23, the day of the Great War. The party is for a child whose father is a famous Western movie star named Cooper Howard. Playing on the television in the background are commercials for Nuka-Cola and Sugar Bomb cereal, both recognizable to any Fallout player as the franchise's signature pre-war consumer products. There is an advertisement for Grognak the Barbarian and the Ruby Ruins, a playable game within Fallout 4's Commonwealth. The television news broadcasts show the president being taken to a secret location, a detail familiar to anyone who has explored Vault-Tec's pre-war history. The weatherman jokes that his job has become pointless. It is a scene full of background information for fans and completely coherent for anyone watching who has never touched a Fallout game. Both things can be true at once. The birthday party parallels Fallout 3's opening, which also takes place at a birthday celebration inside a vault. Fallout 3 opens on the Lone Wanderer's 10th birthday. The show opens on a child's birthday party. The detail is quiet enough to read as coincidence if you don't know the game, and unmistakably intentional if you do. Lucy McLean, played by Ella Purnell, is introduced describing her stats to a Vault-33 council, her repairability, her science skill, her speech capability. She is reading from a summary of her special attributes in a way that functions as both character exposition and game reference. Players who have spent hundreds of hours building characters according to Speckle allocations heard this and understood immediately that the show was speaking their language. The Pip-Boy that Lucy wears is game accurate. When its screen is visible, it shows the same tabs that exist in the game's stats, inventory, data, map, radio. The health screen shows individual limb statuses. The map shows a location pin when she receives objective coordinates. The show chose not to invent a new version of the Pip-Boy. It reproduced the existing one in 3 dimensions, functioning exactly as it does in the games. The Colt 6,520 10mm pistol that Maximus uses is the first firearm in the original 1997 Fallout. The 10mm pistol Lucy grabs in the Super Duper Mart is the version from Fallout 4. 2 different iterations of the same iconic weapon in the same show, honoring 2 different eras of the franchise. The Ripper vibroblade that Lucy later uses is a weapon from multiple games. The Junk Jet, a weapon that fires random debris as projectiles, is a version of the rocket launcher from Fallout 3. The drug known as Jet appears in Episode 1 in the hands of a raider, an inhaler full of chemically enhanced stimulant, giving the user strength and speed and combat capability. In the games, Jet is described as being made from the methane gas produced by Brahmin, the 2-headed mutant cattle of the wasteland. Someone at Obsidian Entertainment in New Vegas has a line of dialogue noting this when the player asks about Jet's origins, and the show uses the drug with full understanding of that lore context. The Raider's hollow-eyed look is not just visual shorthand for addiction. It is accurate to the Fiends, the chem-addicted Raider subfaction from New Vegas, whose visual design informed how the show depicted heavily chemmed-up wasteland dwellers. The hacking minigame appears exactly. When Norm McLean in Vault-33 needs to crack the Overseer's terminal, the screen shows the actual Fallout hacking interface rows of symbols, candidate words, feedback about letters in correct positions. The game's most mechanical and distinctively recognizable UI element, reproduced faithfully in a live-action television show. Maximus, hiding in a refrigerator as a child to survive a nuclear blast near him, has at least 2 layers of reference. It echoes the Fallout 4 mission Kid in a Fridge, in which a young super mutant child is discovered alive inside a refrigerator after decades. It also references the 4th Indiana Jones film, in which Indiana Harrison Ford survives an atomic test by climbing inside a lead-lined refrigerator. The Fallout 4 mission was itself likely referencing that film. The show referenced both at once. The Brotherhood of Steel airship the Pridwin, visible in the show's distance shots, is the same vessel from Fallout 4. The power armor designs match the game-accurate versions players have worn for hundreds of hours. The way Brotherhood soldiers move in their power armor, the sound it makes, the sense of weight and presence it conveys, all of it matches the game's. Shady Sands, the original settlement from the first Fallout, and the capital of the New California Republic in Fallout 2 and New Vegas, appears in the show as a destroyed city, a bombed ruin. A place that was once the largest organized post-war settlement in California, laid waste by something the show slowly reveals was not an accident. This is one of the larger lore revelations of Season 1. The destruction of Shady Sands connects back to Vault-Tec and the Enclave's long-term plans for the wasteland. Matt Berry, best known from the British comedy What We Do in the Shadows, voices a Mr. Handy robot in the show as a character called Snip Snip. Barry appears in the flesh 2 episodes later as a pre-war Hollywood actor named Sebastian Leslie, who sold his vocal rights to be used in the programming of Mr. Handy robots for a fee of $186 and a free robot model. His character mentions the name Codsworth, the Mr. Handy companion in Fallout 4, establishing that the voice of every Mr. Handy in the game series came from this one pre-war actor who sold himself cheap. The connection between the man's face and the robot's voice collapses 200 years of fictional history into a single revelation. The Vault-Tec meeting in the Season 1 finale is the show's most significant lore event. Corporate executives from Vault-Tec, Robco, Westech, Big MT, and Repcon meet to discuss the Vault program and their collective post-war plans. Robert House, the founder of Robco and eventual ruler of New Vegas, appears briefly, played by Rafi Silver, establishing his presence in the show's canon before New Vegas becomes the Season 2 setting. The experiment specifications mentioned in the meeting match the vaults described in the games. Vault 27, intentionally overcrowded. Vault 87, the FEV program that creates super mutants. Vault 29, children only. These are facts about the vaults that players who had explored the game's wikis and terminal entries already knew. Hearing them spoken aloud in a corporate meeting room made the systematic cruelty of the Vault program feel newly immediate. Season 2 of the show took the cast to New Vegas, incorporating elements of Fallout New Vegas's world and characters into the ongoing story. The NCR, House, the Mojave's specific wasteland culture, the casinos, and the neon lights, all of it arrived on screen as the show continued to deepen its relationship with the game's lore. For fans who had played New Vegas, it was a reunion. For viewers who hadn't, it was an introduction to one of the most distinctive settings in the franchise. Section 10. Unanswered Mysteries and Fan Theories. Fallout's greatness as a fictional universe is partly measured by the questions it leaves open. A world fully explained is a world that has stopped breathing. The Fallout universe has been breathing continuously for 29 years, and the things left unresolved are not loose ends, they are intentional gaps, the white spaces in the map where the imagination is invited to travel. The mysterious stranger is the oldest ongoing mystery in the franchise. Present since the original game as a perk that occasionally summons a fedora-wearing gunfighter to assist in combat and then vanish without trace, the stranger has never been explained, never been given an origin, never been assigned a name or a motive. Characters in the games don't acknowledge him. Nobody on the street says they saw a man in a trench coat. He appears, fires, and disappears. Repeatedly, across every game in the series. Nick Valentine's case file in Fallout 4 is the first time any character in the games has acknowledged the stranger's existence. Nick has been trying to find him. Nick has a file. The file contains observations and dead ends, and carefully noted details about appearances and disappearances, and it reaches no conclusions. Nick is a detective with decades of experience, and he has not been able to figure out who or what the mysterious stranger is. Fan theories about the stranger have proliferated over the years. The most popular is that he is the player character from the first Fallout, the Vault Dweller, who has been wandering the wasteland for over 100 years, perhaps modified or enhanced in some way, and whose interventions in subsequent games are a form of ongoing care for the world he helped save in 2161. This theory is unverifiable. It is also genuinely beautiful, and the developers have never officially denied it, which might be deliberate. Another theory holds that the stranger is a manifestation of luck in the game world, that high luck scores attract interventions from a figure who represents fortune itself, walking the wasteland in a coat and hat, showing up when the mathematics of chance aligns in your favor. The stranger never misses. His shots are always successful. He is certainty in a world built on probability. A third theory involves the Lincoln Memorial and the nature of pre-war American mythology. The stranger's appearance, the trench coat, the broad-brimmed hat, the handgun mirrors the aesthetic of the pre-war vigilante fiction that existed in the 1950s. Some fans have suggested he is a pre-war human, modified or preserved somehow, enacting the mythology of the American frontier hero that the culture he came from spent so much time creating. He is the character from the poster in the general store who stepped off the poster and into the wasteland. None of these answers are correct. All of them are interesting. The stranger remains. The fate of each game's protagonist is another ongoing mystery. After the Vault Dweller completes the events of the original Fallout and saves Vault 13, they are cast out of the vault, exiled, as the Overseer decided that someone who had seen and done what the Vault Dweller had seen and done could not reintegrate into a Vault society without destabilizing it. The Vault Dweller wanders north. They eventually settle in a village called Arroyo. The events of Fallout 2 center on their grandchild. The Vault Dweller themselves are gone, their final destination unknown. The Chosen One of Fallout 2 is last seen after defeating the Enclave and destroying the Poseidon oil platform. They return to Arroyo. The village is rebuilt. And then, the game ends. The Chosen One's subsequent life is unrecorded. The lone wanderer of Fallout 3 triggers the purification of the Potomac River with pure water. Depending on choices made in Broken Steel DLC, they either die in the process or survive. If they survive, they continue operating in the capital wasteland. Where they go after the story ends is not addressed. The Courier of New Vegas is perhaps the most discussed in terms of possible post-game fates, because the faction victory they enable in the Battle of Hoover Dam determines what the Mojave looks like going forward, and their personal history before being shot is never established. The Courier is defined almost entirely by what they do, not by who they were. They could be anyone. Several fan theories attempt to connect the Courier to other characters in the franchise, to the mysterious stranger, to various individuals encountered in later games, but nothing has been confirmed. The alien presence in the Fallout universe is one of its longest-running threads. Aliens have appeared in every mainline game, from the crashed UFO and alien blaster in Fallout 1, through the Mothership Zeta DLC in Fallout 3, to the crashed ship encounters in Fallout 4, and the alien influence quests in Fallout 76. They are always presented as real. They are clearly operating in the Fallout world with some kind of purpose. But what that purpose is, whether they were observing humanity, experimenting on it, responsible for any of the pre-war or post-war events, has never been addressed directly by any main storyline. The Zetan aliens of Fallout 3's Mothership Zeta had been abducting humans from Earth for centuries. The DLC's ship contains a medieval English soldier, a samurai, an American World War II soldier, and several contemporary wastelanders, all held in stasis or awakened for various purposes. The alien technology is extraordinarily advanced. The aliens themselves are small and apparently fragile. What they were trying to accomplish with their collection of human specimens is never fully explained. A theory that has circulated for years holds that the aliens were responsible for certain key technologies in the Fallout world, that the pre-war development of energy weapons, of particular alloys, of specific pharmaceutical compounds, bore alien fingerprints that were either discovered and reverse-engineered or directly licensed through contact that was classified and never acknowledged publicly. This would give the alien presence a functional role in the timeline's divergence from real history, explaining the retro-futuristic aesthetic not as a historical accident, but as the result of an injection of external technology that happened to be applied to 1950s infrastructure, rather than something more modern. The mysterious stranger, the fate of every protagonist, the origin of pre-war technology, the full extent of what the Enclave knew and when, these are the white spaces. These are the places where the franchise breathes. Fan communities have spent years building theory documents, timeline reconstructions, and connection maps. The Fallout Bible, a document created by developer Chris Avallone during the Black Isle era that attempted to canonize and systematize the lore of the first two games, is a fascinating artifact of a franchise trying to manage its own mythology. Some of what it established was later contradicted. Some was expanded. Some remains canonical. The attempt to create a definitive document for a universe full of intentional ambiguity was always going to be partial. What makes Fallout's mysteries stick is that they are not random gaps. They are gaps shaped like questions. The question of what happened to the Vault Dweller is shaped like a meditation on exile and identity, on what it means to be changed so thoroughly by experience that you can no longer go home. The question of what the mysterious stranger wants is shaped like a meditation on luck and intervention, on whether benevolent forces operate in the wasteland or whether what looks like grace is just probability. The questions are built into the world on purpose, with care, by people who understood that good fiction leaves room for the reader. The nuclear blast killed everything. The nuclear blast made everything new. Both things are true in Fallout, and the tension between them is what the whole franchise lives in. Section 11. The music, art, and aesthetic of Fallout. There is a playlist that the Fallout world runs on, and it is one of the most carefully curated and philosophically significant musical selections in any video game franchise. It consists primarily of American popular music, from the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, the Ink Spots, Bing Crosby, Perry Como, Doris Day, Roy Brown, and dozens of others played on in-world radio stations that still somehow function 2 centuries after nuclear war. Their towers intact, their automated playlists cycling through the pre-war catalog endlessly. The selection is not arbitrary. These are songs about love, about longing, about going home, about staying together in difficult times, about the small domestic happinesses that the Great War destroyed. I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire by the Ink Spots, the opening song of Fallout 3's Galaxy News Radio, and one of the most recognizable pieces of musical shorthand in gaming, is a love song. It is a tender, unhurried song about wanting nothing more than to be with one person. Playing it over the ruins of Washington, D.C., over the irradiated soil and the collapsed monuments, is a joke that is also a prayer that is also a wound. The ink spots appear across multiple games. Their harmonies, the bass voice speaking singing, the bridge in a low register, the high lead vocal above it became associated with the franchise so thoroughly that hearing them outside the game feels immediately post-apocalyptic. Maybe that's why by the ink spots, it's all over. But the crying, we three. These songs were chosen because they represented a particular American emotional register. The optimism of the 1940s and 50s, the sense that love and decency would prevail, the sweetness of a world that trusted its own continuity. Playing them in a wasteland is the franchise's core irony made audible. The world the music believes in is gone. The music still plays. The Fallout world's retro-futurist aesthetic extends far beyond the music. It is present in the advertising that still appears on ruined billboards, products with bright primary colors, cheerful cartoon mascots, slogans about the good life. Nuka-Cola, with its blue bottles and its enormous corporate reach, was America's most popular drink before the war. Its bottle cap became the post-war currency not through any institutional decision, but simply because the caps were small, metal, standardized, and impossible to counterfeit. The economic collapse of post-war civilization found its medium in the debris of a soft drink. Vault Boy, the smiling, yellow-haired cartoon mascot who illustrates every perk and stat in the modern games, was originally the character used in Vault-Tec's promotional materials. He gives a thumbs up to everything, to radiation resistance, to skill in unarmed combat, to the ability to perform surgery on yourself in the field. His cheerfulness is unbroken regardless of what he is being asked to illustrate. He is the pre-war world's relationship with its own potential consequences. Optimistic, perpetually grinning, giving a thumbs up to things that should terrify him. The power armor is perhaps the single most recognizable image in all of Fallout. It was designed for the original game by Leonard Boyarsky, who was inspired in part by the costume design in a 1995 French film called The City of Lost Children. Its industrial aesthetic, its tubing and vents, its sense of something mechanical and harsh and beautiful. Boyarsky built the helmet first, as concept art for the cover and cinematics. He loved it so much that he redesigned the in-game power armor to match the concept, rather than the other way around. The final design was industrial, heavy, iconic. It appeared on the cover of Fallout 3 and Fallout 4, and became the franchise's visual identity in the same way that a dragon's head became the identity of Elder Scrolls. The world of Fallout has always been designed to feel lived in. Not merely destroyed, but lived in before it was destroyed, and lived in again after. The pre-war buildings have authentic details, genuine furniture brands, genuine product names, genuine architectural conventions of mid-century American construction. The post-war constructions built from salvage have their own aesthetic authenticity, the way scrap metal and leather and salvaged machinery combine into objects that are functional before they are beautiful, but often manage to be both. The ASMR quality of Fallout's environments, and this is worth acknowledging, directly comes from the combination of ambient sound design and visual texture. The creak of a rusted door, the hiss of steam from a broken pipe, the distant crackle of a radio through a damaged speaker, the crunch of irradiated gravel underfoot, rain on corrugated metal. The ambient sounds of the wasteland are designed to be interesting without being demanding, and they create a particular kind of immersive texture that many players have described as deeply relaxing to simply exist inside. This is partly intentional and partly the consequence of designing a world that had to feel inhabited by history. A world without ambient sound is a stage set. A world with ambient sound is a place. Fallout's sound design team built a place. And then they filled it with music that had already existed and been loved for decades, and the combination created something that players don't just play, they inhabit. The visual language of Fallout's terminals, the amber or green text on dark screens, the CRT monitor curvature, the dot matrix font, is a deliberate evocation of early personal computing. In the Fallout timeline, computers developed differently from ours. Transistor technology did not revolutionize computing in the same way. So the computers of the Fallout world look like very advanced versions of early 1980s computing aesthetics. They have enormous processing power inside machines that look archaic to us. The gap between what the machines can do and what they look like is part of the world's internal logic and part of its visual appeal. The holotape as a medium has a specific texture. The game found a way to make recorded voice messages feel personal and specific, a format that couldn't be easily faked or edited, that carried the voice of whoever made it through whatever time had passed since the recording. Reading a terminal entry is one kind of experience. Listening to a holotape is another. You hear the voice, you hear the background, you hear when someone is scared or exhausted or trying not to cry. The holotapes of Fallout are the franchise's most intimate storytelling tool. Ink spots, crumbling mansions, amber monitors, cheerful wasteland merchants selling salvaged garbage for bottle caps, the aesthetic of Fallout is total. It is self-consistent from the smallest detail to the largest structure. It is a world that knew what it wanted to look like and sound like and feel like, and it built that coherently across 29 years and half a dozen studios. That consistency is what makes it possible to walk into New Vegas or the Capital Wasteland or the Commonwealth and feel immediately that you are in a specific place with a specific history rather than a generic post-apocalyptic backdrop. The art direction of the original games under Leonard Boyarsky established visual rules that survived the transition to Bethesda's more expansive format. The colors of the wasteland are specific: the yellow-gray of irradiated sky, the rust and brown of collapsed infrastructure, the occasional blast of neon from a pre-war sign that still has power. Green in the wasteland is always meaningful: a garden, a greenhouse, something growing against the odds. Blue is usually water, usually either dangerous or precious. The color symbolism is consistent enough to function as a visual grammar. The franchise's relationship with Americana goes deep enough to be uncomfortable at moments. The pre-war America of Fallout is not a flattering portrait. It is a society that chose optimism over honesty, that covered its cruelties in flag colors and smiling mascots, that built bombs and called them protection, and convinced itself the math of mass destruction was worth running. The aesthetic that Fallout inherited from the 1950s is inseparable from what the 1950s actually was: a period of extraordinary conformity, of suppressed civil rights movements, of Cold War paranoia dressed in suburban calm. The games have always known this, even when they don't say it directly. The Republic of Dave, the segregated robots who refuse to serve ghouls in certain pre-war themed bars, the propaganda that loops in the simulation of Tranquility Lane, the cheerfulness of the Vault-Tec advertisements, the smiling faces on everything while the world was ending. War never changes. But the aesthetic through which we understand war, the way it gets dressed up in colors we love, the way its instruments get made to look friendly, the way its architects put on the faces of people who just want to help, that is also something the franchise has been documenting since 1997. The most disturbing thing in Fallout is not the death claws or the radiation. It is the smiling mascot giving the thumbs up. It is the cheerful jingle still playing on the automated speaker in the ruined atrium. It is the sense that the whole catastrophe had a brand, and the brand is still running. Section 12. War never changes. Closing reflections. We have been walking for a long time. Through the vaults and the wasteland, through the Capital Wasteland, and the Mojave, and the Commonwealth, through the development offices of Interplay and Black Isle and Obsidian and Bethesda, following the strange and difficult and occasionally triumphant story of how a franchise gets built. The thing that stands out, having spent this much time in the world of Fallout, is the consistency of care. Not every game has been excellent. Not every decision has aged well. The franchise has been made under financial pressure, under time constraints, under the weight of a fan base with strong and sometimes contradictory opinions about what Fallout should be. And through all of that, the people building it have continued to hide small personal signatures in texture files, to write optional terminal entries that nobody will ever be assigned to read, to build secret rooms that require specific console commands to reach, to embed their own lives and loves and references and anxieties into the ruins of a world that never existed. The peonies that Jeb added to his wedding flowers, the Tim Kaine head explosion on the credits screen, the Ray Bradbury tribute in the McClellan house, the ink spots playing on a radio that should have stopped working 200 years ago, these are the things that make Fallout feel like it was made by humans rather than by committees. And it was. It was made by Tim Kaine working alone at 7 inches the morning before the rest of the office arrived. By Leonard Boyarsky designing a helmet that he loved too much not to use. By the QA testers who came in on weekends without pay because they felt something worth caring about in the early build. By Todd Howard who stole his brother's disc and never gave it back. There is something very Wasteland about that act, actually. Finding something you love and holding on to it past the point where it was technically yours. The lone wanderer holds on to their father's memory through the capital wasteland. The courier holds on to the question of what happened at the beginning of their story through the entirety of New Vegas. The sole survivor holds on to the shape of a family that is now unrecognizable. Every protagonist in the franchise is holding on to something. The franchise has been holding on to itself for almost 30 years. Through the collapse of Black Isle, through the controversial transition to Bethesda, through New Vegas's compressed development and buggy launch, through Fallout 76's troubled beginning and eventual redemption, through a TV series that had every chance to dilute what made the game singular and instead chose to love them too much to betray them. The Wasteland keeps producing people who rebuild things. That is the other side of war, never changes. Civilizations keep rising inside the rubble, and they keep making the same mistakes, and they keep trying again anyway. The NCR is flawed and trying. Diamond City is flawed and trying. Good Neighbor is flawed and trying. Every settlement in every game is a group of people who decided that building something was worth the risk of its eventual failure. That hope, held in the same hand as full knowledge of what happened last time, is what Fallout is ultimately about. Not the bombs, not the factions. Not the lore of who built what weapon or what experiment ran in which vault. Those are the furniture. The furniture is extraordinary, but the room it sits in is the question of whether people can be trusted with the future, and whether the answer to that question being no, often, maybe, we'll see, is a reason to stop trying. The franchise's answer, running through every game and the TV series and 29 years of development across multiple studios and creative visions, is consistent. The answer is, keep walking. There is more wasteland. There are more people in it. Something worth finding is usually further than you can see from where you're standing. War never changes. People, though, sometimes do. And somewhere out there, in an amber-lit terminal in a vault that hasn't been opened in decades, there is probably a last entry from someone who made it just a little further than anyone expected. Close your eyes. The radio is still playing. Somewhere in the waste, the ink spots are singing something about staying together, and the sun is setting orange over a horizon that used to be a city. And if you stay very still, you can almost hear it all from here. If you made it this far, thank you. Genuinely, if you enjoyed this, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. There are more secrets and more worlds to get through. And this is just the beginning. Drop your location and time zone in the comments. I love seeing where in the world people are watching from. Until next time, sleep well. Script end. Section 13. The weapons, the wasteland, and the world's strange physics. One of the things that makes wandering the wasteland feel different from other post-apocalyptic settings is the weapons. Not just the variety of them, the pipes and the lasers, the bolt actions and the plasma casters, but the names, the Fat Man, the Junk Jet, the Deliverer, the Mysterious Magnum. Every significant weapon in Fallout has a name, and every name tells you something about the world that produced it or the people who named it after the world ended. The Fat Man is a portable, tactical nuclear warhead launcher. It fires a miniature nuclear bomb. The name is a direct reference to one of the 2 atomic bombs the United States dropped in 1945. Fat Man was the code name for the bomb dropped on Nagasaki on the 9th of August 1945. There is no restraint in the reference. The weapon that serves as Fallout's ultimate conventional armament is named after one of the 2 most destructive individual weapons ever deployed in real human history, reduced to something a single person can carry and fire while running across a parking lot. The joke is about scale. The joke is about how what was once civilization ending becomes just another tool in the hardware. The joke is not funny in the way jokes are usually funny. The MIRV, an upgrade variation, fires 8 mini-nukes simultaneously. It stands for Multiple Independently Targetable Reentry Vehicle, which is real military terminology for a nuclear delivery system that can strike multiple targets with a single launch. Fallout uses that real acronym, that real concept, and makes it something you can pick up and carry in a backpack, which says something about what the franchise thinks of the arms race. The junk jet, called the rocket launcher in Fallout 3, fires whatever random objects the player loads into it. Toilet plungers, burnt books, coffee cups, toy cars. The game's physics engine handles them all as projectiles. There is something deeply characteristic about a weapon that turns garbage into ammunition, in a world where garbage is one of the most abundant resources available. The way weapons age in Fallout 4, degrading with use, requiring specific components for maintenance, rewarding players who learn the crafting system, created a different relationship between players and their arsenal than earlier games had. In Fallout 3 and New Vegas, weapons could be repaired using other weapons of the same type. In Fallout 4, weapons were modifiable in extraordinary ways. A pipe pistol could become a pipe sniper rifle. A bolt-action hunting rifle could be rebuilt into a weapon with a suppressor, an extended barrel, a different sighting system, a larger magazine. The crafting system made every gun in the game both permanent and infinitely variable. There is something philosophically consistent about that too. In the wasteland, you work with what exists. Nothing is new. Everything is adapted. The weapons the survivors carry are pre-war designs, maintained past their design lifetime, or cobbled together constructions from salvage, or for the technologically advanced factions, gleaming energy weapons that represent the apex of what pre-war science produced before everything stopped. The energy weapons in Fallout are explicitly a product of the retro-futurist timeline divergence. In our history, transistor-based electronics miniaturized rapidly in the late 20th century. In Fallout's timeline, that miniaturization didn't happen, and energy weapon development was the technological frontier instead. Laser rifles, plasma guns, Gauss rifles that use magnetic fields to accelerate projectiles beyond the speed of sound. These are the high-end technology of a world that never got smartphones but did get personal nuclear launchers. The Vault's resident weapons are distinct from the wasteland weapons. Vault-Tec security protocols involved 10mm pistols and Vault security armor designs that were clean, corporate, purpose-built. When a Vault dweller steps outside carrying a Vault-issue 10mm, they carry the mark of a world that ended, a tool from an institution that lied to them. Most of them modify their equipment as soon as they can find replacements. The wasteland economy revolves around maintenance of weapons and armor more than almost anything else. Merchants who deal in weapon components and repair services are among the most vital people in any post-war settlement. The Mojave's Gunrunners, a faction that manufactures and sells weapons with fanatical quality standards, are arguably more important to the stability of the region than any political faction. They don't take sides. They keep the armament flowing. In a world that runs on violence, the people who make the tools of violence become a kind of neutral infrastructure. The Pip-Boy itself is a weapon of sorts, or at least a tool that shapes everything, including combat. The Vault-Assisted Targeting System, VATS, slows time and allows precise targeting of specific body parts. It draws from the statistics of the original turn-based games, translated into real-time combat as a mechanic that lets players plan shots rather than just react. The crippling system that comes with it hits someone in the legs and they slow down, hit them in the arms and they lose accuracy, hit them in the head and they might stagger or lose perception, adds a tactical layer to what could otherwise be a straight shooter. VATS was controversial when Fallout 3 introduced it because it broke the pure real-time action flow. Players could pause to aim, calculate, and execute. This was considered non-immersive by some and absolutely essential by others. For players whose spatial reflexes weren't optimized for first-person shooting, VATS was what made Fallout accessible. For players who wanted to feel the tactical weight of every encounter, VATS was what made Fallout Fallout and not just another shooter with an RPG skin. The environmental hazards of the wasteland are worth dwelling on, because they are one of the ways Fallout's world communicates history without dialogue. The radiation zones are not random. They follow the patterns of nuclear detonation and fallout dispersal. The areas around Washington, D.C.'s heavily bombed zones are more radioactive than the outskirts. The glowing sea in the Commonwealth, a region of Massachusetts so thoroughly irradiated that special radiation protection is required to enter, marks the point of impact of one of the bombs that fell in 2077. Walking into it feels different from walking anywhere else in the game because the design makes it feel geologically wrong, like entering a wound in the earth. Rad scorpions, rad roaches, death claws. Yao guai, the mutated fauna of the wasteland, are often recognizable American animals, transformed by radiation and the forced evolutionary viruses spread through the ecosystem. Rad scorpions are scorpions, massively enlarged. Rad roaches are cockroaches, because of course they are. Yao guai are bears. Death claws were genetically engineered by the pre-war U.S. military as instruments of warfare, chameleon DNA, Jackson chameleon specifically, combined with other genetic modifications to produce something fast, strong, aggressive, and armored by natural claws that could cut through power armor. The irony of the Deathclaw is that they were weapons of war that survived the war, escaped containment, and have been doing exactly what they were designed to do, killing humans efficiently ever since, with no allegiance to any faction and no understanding that the war they were made for ended 200 years ago. They are perhaps the purest embodiment of the franchise's theme of consequences outlasting intentions. Brahmin, the two-headed cattle that are the wasteland's primary livestock, are the most useful mutant species in the franchise's ecosystem. They provide meat, leather, and labor. Their dual heads are a visual gag that never stops being slightly surreal, and in a world full of nightmarish mutations, their placidity is actually reassuring. You can encounter Brahmin being herded, Brahmin grazing, Brahmin carrying loads for caravan traders. They are the wasteland's farm animals, and their calm persistence in an uncalm world gives them a strange, gentle dignity. The way the wasteland recycles everything extends to human culture. Music gets reinterpreted, technology gets rebuilt, stories get told around campfires that are heavily modified versions of stories that existed before the war, stripped of the context that would make them fully coherent. There is a recurring element in Fallout games of pre-war media being consumed by post-war audiences who can't always fully understand it. The Grognak the Barbarian comics that appear as power boost items in the games are pre-war sword and sorcery pulp fiction stories of a world that never existed, about a hero doing things that never happened, beloved by people in a world that also doesn't quite fit the imagination anymore. Someone in the wasteland is collecting Grognak comics. They have no power left and no sword, and the fictional barbarian on the cover could not navigate their actual problems. They collect them anyway. That act, the preservation and consumption of fiction in impossible circumstances, is one of the most human things in the Fallout universe. The world ended and people kept telling stories. They kept reading the ones that had already been written. They kept needing the other worlds that fiction contains. Section 14. Companion Lore and the Souls in the Wasteland. No one in the Fallout universe is only what they appear to be at first meeting. The companions who can travel with you across the various wastelands are, without exception, more complicated than their surface suggests, and uncovering that complexity requires patience, observation, and enough in-game time for them to begin talking. Dogmeat has been in the franchise since the first game, appearing as a wild German shepherd in the wasteland who can be convinced to follow the Vault Dweller. His name comes from the 1975 post-apocalyptic film A Boy and His Dog, in which a dog named Blood and his human companion navigate a post-nuclear wasteland, one of the clear influences on the early Fallout aesthetic. The dog in the film has a dry, sardonic internal voice that narrates their experiences. Dogmeat does not narrate anything. He runs ahead and finds things and sometimes takes damage protecting you and looks up at you afterward with complete trust. In Fallout 4, Dogmeat was the focal character of the game's reveal trailer at E3 2015. He appeared before a human character did. He found his way through a ruined house to where the sole survivor would be. This was not accidental. The decision to lead with the dog told players something about what kind of story was being told and about what the game valued. Dogmeat in the TV series was revealed to be an experimental subject from the Enclave who was rescued by a scientist and eventually found his way into the wasteland. The detail that he was bred by the Enclave for testing does not diminish his nature. It just adds another layer to why his loyalty is something to take seriously. Nick Valentine's companion questline in Fallout 4 is one of the most affecting stories in the game. Nick is an android built by the Institute, carrying the genuine memories of a pre-war detective also named Nick Valentine, a man who loved someone who was taken from him, who tried to do the right thing, who was killed, and whose identity was absorbed into a machine. The android Nick doesn't know exactly what he is in relation to the human Nick. He knows the memories. He knows the love and the grief. He has decided those count as his own. His questline is, in its quietest moments, about the question of whether a mind that inherited its history from someone else has the right to claim that history. Kate in Fallout 4 begins as a cage fighter at a raider pit called Combat Zone, having been sold into indentured labor by her own parents at the age of 18. Her personality is defensive, aggressive, and studded with humor that is doing a lot of work to keep other things from showing. Her companion questline involves helping her through a chem addiction and eventually getting to the layer beneath the armor, which is a person who has never been allowed to believe that she was worth caring for. The quest requires finding a facility called the Memory Den and accessing a specific machine that allows temporary access to someone's recorded memories. What she finds there and what she does with it is one of Fallout 4's best-written sequences. John Hancock in Fallout 4 is a ghoul who runs Goodneighbor the Commonwealth settlement for people who don't fit in Diamond City. He is named after John Hancock, one of the founding fathers of the United States, and his philosophy of government loose, tolerant, protective of the outcast, personally chaotic is a direct contrast to the controlled, paranoid governance of Diamond City. Hancock chose to become a ghoul. He took a particularly extreme experimental chem that transformed him, because he had grown disgusted with the normality he was supposed to want. He governs Goodneighbor with a genuine belief in freedom that is adjacent to recklessness and is somehow, in that specific context, the closest thing to a good government that the Commonwealth offers. Piper Wright in Fallout 4 is a journalist. She runs a newspaper called Public Occurrences from Diamond City, named after one of the earliest American newspapers published in 1690. She is one of the few characters in the Commonwealth who is actively trying to maintain the idea that information should be available to ordinary people, that the powerful should be scrutinized, and that the truth is worth the inconvenience of finding it. Her relationship with Diamond City's mayor is contentious precisely because she keeps publishing things he would prefer were kept quiet. In a world full of factions that rely on secrecy and propaganda, Piper's occupation is a small act of resistance that the game treats with the seriousness it deserves. Codsworth, the sole survivor's pre-war mister, Handy, has been waiting in the ruins of Sanctuary Hills for 210 years. He has been cleaning a house that can't be cleaned, maintaining routines for a family that doesn't exist anymore, talking to himself in an empty cul-de-sac. When the sole survivor returns, he doesn't know how to process having actually survived the waiting. He has been performing loyalty for over 2 centuries with no one to receive it. His character is a companion study in what hope costs, in what it means to keep going in the absence of anyone to go for. The companion system in Fallout games has always been one of the franchise's most effective storytelling mechanisms. The companions who travel with you see what you see. They react to what you do. They approve or disapprove of your choices. In Fallout 4, companion affinity shifted their dialogue and eventually unlocked personal quests. In New Vegas, companions had their own complex backstories and motivations, and several of them were carrying significant internal conflicts that the player could either help resolve or leave unaddressed. The way the companions experience the wasteland alongside the player is part of how the franchise establishes that the wasteland is inhabited by individuals, not archetypes. Arcade Gannon in New Vegas is a doctor with a complicated relationship to his own past. He has more in common with the Enclave than he wants to admit, and his personal history is woven through with the franchise's recurring themes of idealism confronting reality. Veronica Santangelo is a Brotherhood of Steel scribe who is already questioning whether the Brotherhood's mission is what she needs it to be, and whose companion quest is about the grief of realizing that an institution you loved is not going to become what you hoped it would become. Raul Tejada in New Vegas is an old ghoul hundreds of years old, who remembers Mexico before the Great War, who has survived everything, who is tired in the way that only immortality makes a person tired. He was a gunfighter once, and a magnificent one. Now he tends machines in a radio tower and tells the courier that he's done with all that. His companion quest is about whether Raoul will allow himself to be the person he used to be again, whether the accumulated weight of having lived through everything can be set down, or whether it defines you forever. The emotional landscape of Fallout's companions is one of its best-kept secrets in the sense that most players rush through companion quests or don't engage with them at all. The mechanical reward for completing a companion quest is often a perk or a relationship upgrade. The actual reward is the story. It's always the story. Section 15. The philosophy of the wasteland and Fallout's enduring questions. At its philosophical core, Fallout keeps asking the same question in different registers. What does humanity owe itself? What does civilization owe the people it contains? What survives when everything else is stripped away? And is what survives worth building on? These are not questions unique to Fallout. They are the oldest questions in fiction, but Fallout asks them in a specific, concrete, post-apocalyptic context that makes the abstractions feel material. In the capital wasteland, asking whether the ends justify the means is not a classroom exercise. It is the question you must answer when you decide whether to give the purified water to the people who need it most or to the faction best positioned to use it politically. It is the question you answer in Vault 112 when you decide what to do about Braun. The Master in the first Fallout is the franchise's most philosophically interesting villain because his argument is coherent and his methods are unambiguous. The Master is a human who was transformed through FEV exposure and years of suffering into something vast and terrible. He has built an army of super mutants, transforming humans against their will, because he genuinely believes that the process of mutagenesis, painful as it is, will produce a humanity capable of surviving the post-nuclear world. Ordinary humans, in his view, are fragile. They are dying. They are failing to adapt. His super mutants are the next step. The Master is wrong, and the game makes this clear not through moral lecturing but through evidence. Super mutants are sterile. His vision of a transformed humanity cannot reproduce. The future he is building will die with the generation he creates. If the player's character has high enough intelligence, they can point this out in dialogue. The Master, confronted with the flaw in his reasoning, breaks. He cannot process the contradiction. He destroys himself and his base, rather than continue in a project he now understands to be meaningless. It is an extraordinary moment for a 1997 RPG. A villain who can be defeated with logic. A final boss who can be talked to death not in the sense of being bored into surrender, but in the sense of having his foundational assumption revealed as false and being unable to survive the revelation. This established something about Fallout's intellectual ambition that persisted through every subsequent game. Every villain in the franchise has a logic. Every faction has premises that aren't entirely wrong. Every philosophy has a flaw that its adherents can usually see coming for them, even as they accelerate toward it. Caesar in New Vegas quotes Hegelian historical philosophy at the Courier. He has constructed his empire from genuine intellectual material. He read the books. He studied the patterns. He made a theory of history and applied it to the wasteland. His theory produces slavery. His reading of Hegel produces a military society that crucifies people on crosses along the highway. The intellectual foundation and the barbaric practice coexist in one person, and New Vegas doesn't resolve the dissonance by making Caesar less intelligent. It makes him more intelligent and more barbaric, and shows you that the two are not mutually exclusive. The Institute in Fallout 4 is run by people who are genuinely brilliant. Their technology is generations ahead of anything else in the wasteland. Their research is real and in some areas remarkable. They have also decided that the people above the ground are not meaningful stakeholders in what the Institute does with its capabilities, and that the surface world is essentially a laboratory they can operate in without needing permission. The gap between their intellectual accomplishment and their ethical abdication is the heart of what makes them interesting as villains, and the game deliberately refuses to let you dismiss them as simply evil. They are brilliant people who made specific choices, and the choices were wrong, and some of them know it. The Railroad raises a question that Fallout 4 handles with more nuance than it is usually given credit for. At what point does sufficiently sophisticated artificial intelligence deserve moral consideration? The Institute's synths begin as obvious robots and evolve, in the most advanced generations, into things indistinguishable from humans. They have memories, they have fears, they have things they want. The Railroad argues that these qualities are sufficient to establish moral status. The Brotherhood argues that they are simulations of those qualities, not the real thing. The game doesn't fully resolve this debate, which is appropriate because it hasn't been resolved in reality either. The philosophical literature on machine consciousness and moral patienthood is active and contentious. Fallout embedded a real, ongoing philosophical dispute into a story about androids and wastelands, and most players didn't notice because they were too busy deciding whether to side with the Institute or the Brotherhood. The question that haunts every Fallout game's ending is the one that the franchise has never fully answered, and maybe can't, given what humanity has already done. Given the documented capacity for cruelty and self-destruction, and the institutional engineering of suffering, is there reason to believe the next civilization will be different? The answer the games seem to reach, through the settlement building and the companion stories and the individual acts of decency that appear in terminal entries and holotapes throughout the wasteland, is, not necessarily, but worth trying anyway. The NCR is flawed and expanding. Diamond City is paranoid and afraid. Good Neighbor is chaotic and violent. And in all three places, people have decided that having a place is better than not having one, that a tempting community is better than abandoning it, that the risk of screwing it up again is a risk worth taking. The player characters in Fallout are all, in various ways, people who didn't have to keep going but did. The Vault Dweller was exiled and could have stopped caring. The Chosen One came from a dying village but didn't have to go back. The Lone Wanderer's father was gone, and maybe could have stayed gone. The Courier was shot and left in a grave, and could have stayed in Good Springs. The sole survivor woke up in 2287 with nothing left of what they had, and could have walked back into the vault and closed the door. They all kept walking. That is Fallout's answer. Not a political ideology, not a faction, just keep walking. There is more wasteland. There are more people in it who need something from someone willing to help. The settlement you build might fail. The civilization you protect might collapse again. The companions who travel with you will eventually, in the canonical future of the timeline, be gone. But the walk continues. And that's the thing about the wasteland. It is enormous. It is dangerous. It is full of things that want to kill you, and things that want to trick you, and things that used to be something else entirely. And it is also in the early morning, when the sky is yellow and the radio is playing something from 1944, and a city's worth of ruins stretches toward a horizon, you'll never reach astonishingly beautiful. Section 16. Fallout 76 and the Online Wasteland. Fallout 76 represents the most ambitious and most troubled chapter in the franchise's recent history. It took the Fallout formula and added one profound change. Other people. Real people, playing simultaneously, visible in the world, capable of helping you or hunting you. The wasteland of Appalachia, the hills and forests of West Virginia, set 25 years after the Great War in the year 2102, became a shared space. The launch in November 2018 was not smooth. The game was technically unstable. The canvas bags promised in the Power Armor Edition collector's product arrived made of cheaper nylon instead. The spectral system had been redesigned in ways that frustrated longtime players. The absence of human NPCs, every named character in the original version was dead, leaving only robots and holotapes and terminal entries, meant that the social and storytelling elements that made previous Fallout games compelling were entirely absent, replaced by emergent interactions with other players. The response from the original Fallout community was harsh. Todd Howard, who had publicly expressed reluctance about multiplayer Fallout before being convinced to proceed, acknowledged the problems with unusual directness. Bethesda committed to fixing things, and then fixed them. The Wastelanders update in April 2020 added human NPCs to Appalachia, gave the world a proper main questline, and reintroduced the dialogue and faction choices that had been missing. Over the following years, further updates expanded the story significantly. The Fallout TV show's second season incorporated the Ghoul character as a playable presence in Fallout 76, connecting the game to the show's canon in a tangible way. The lore of Appalachia, for those willing to engage with it through the game's original terminal and holotape format, is rich and strange. The Mothman cult, a group of people worshipping a West Virginian cryptid that, in the Fallout universe, is a real and genuinely supernatural entity, is one of the most interesting pieces of world-building in the franchise. The Flatwoods Monster, another West Virginia cryptid, appears. The Grafton Monster, a local legend, has a physical presence in the game. Fallout 76 leaned into the specific folklore of its real-world location in a way no previous Fallout game had done, rooting the post-apocalyptic setting in a particular American regional identity. The secret history of Vault 76 itself, the Control Vault, the one without an experiment, the one where everything was supposed to go right, adds an interesting wrinkle to the Vault lore. Vault 76 opened on Reclamation Day, 25 years after the Great War, exactly on schedule. It was meant to release America's best and brightest, to begin the work of rebuilding. In practice, the people who emerge from Vault 76 are the player characters of Fallout 76, armed with Pip-Boys and the vague mandate to reclaim Appalachia. What they find is that someone already tried. The Responders, a pre-existing group of firefighters, doctors, and utility workers who had survived the initial catastrophe and built a functioning aid network, had been destroyed by a scorched plague that transformed humans and animals into aggressive, mindless creatures. The Responders left archives. They left training materials. They left robots who still believe the Responders are coming back to teach their courses. The ghost of a functioning, altruistic post-war community haunts Appalachia, making the Vault 76 dwellers' efforts feel like the second attempt at something that almost worked once. The Enclave faction in Fallout 76, specifically the Enclave of Appalachia, cut off from the main organization on the oil rig, represents the most detailed portrait of the Enclave's ideological collapse the series has offered. The Secretary of Agriculture, who attempted to launch additional nuclear strikes post-Great War, the internal power struggles, the genuine believers, and the opportunists, all of it is documented in the same terminal entry format that the franchise has always used to tell its deep history. The Appalachian Enclave's failure is presented as inevitable. The organization was built on control, and when control failed, it had nothing else. The Brotherhood of Steel's Appalachian chapter has a similar arc. Elder Maxon's ancestor was more pragmatic than his descendants would become. But even the original chapter's attempt to stabilize the region ended in collapse before the events of Fallout 76. Players who find the Brotherhood's bunkers find records of an organization that tried and couldn't hold together. The lesson keeps presenting itself. Institutions built for emergencies tend to preserve the emergency conditions that justify them. The one genuinely optimistic lore thread in Fallout 76's early story is the Free States, a pre-war organization of people who didn't trust the government and built their own bunkers, independent of Vault-Tec. They were not wealthy. They were not connected. They were ordinary people who looked at the way the world was going and decided to prepare themselves rather than trust the institutions that were supposed to protect them. Some of them survived. Their bunkers were small, but they were honest about what they were. Nobody lied to the Free States about what they were signing up for. The Free States' survival is, in Fallout's world, a kind of tribute to the power of institutional distrust. Not paranoia, exactly more like a realistic assessment of the fact that large organizations have interests that differ from the interests of the individuals inside them, and that sometimes the prudent thing is to not wait for the official shelter to be ready. Section 17, Everything that got cut. The history of what Fallout cut before release is almost as interesting as the history of what it kept. Across 30 years and multiple developers, the gap between what was planned and what shipped reveals the conditions under which great games actually get made compromised, constrained, and still somehow exceptional. In the original Fallout, the GURPS system was active and functional for 3 years of development before being abandoned months before launch. Steve Jackson, GURPS's creator, had objections to specific violent content in the game. The development team, rather than alter the content, built an entirely new role-playing system from scratch. Special was not a backup plan, it was an emergency response to a contractual breakdown created under pressure in the final stretch of development. The system it produced was better than what it replaced, and became the foundation of the franchise's identity. The ending of the original Fallout was changed late in development. The Master's base, the Cathedral, originally had a different outcome for the final confrontation. The structure of the Vault Dweller's exile was not always the intended conclusion. Tim Kaine has discussed in interviews how much of the game's ending shifted during the final months, as the team balanced tone, practical content completion, and their own feelings about what the story deserved. The banishment ending the overseer's decision to exile the person who saved them was kept because it felt honest to the franchise's theme, the hero who changes too much to go home, the victory that costs you exactly what you were fighting to protect. Fallout 2 cut enormous amounts of content due to Interplay's financial pressure and the compressed timeline. The game shipped with known bugs that the developers were aware of and hadn't been given time to fix. The tribal opening area was supposed to be more developed than the release version. Several quests were incomplete. The game is in some ways a testament to what could be built in 9 months with enough passion and not enough time, but also a record of everything that 9 months couldn't contain. Fallout New Vegas's cut content, as we discussed, includes Ulysses in the main game, the post-dam world, and dozens of smaller locations and quests. But some of the most interesting cuts were character-specific. There were additional options for interacting with major faction leaders that were removed for time. There were planned companion interactions that never made it to the final build. The companion chem addiction mechanic for Cass, the caravan merchant companion, was intended to have more depth than the shipped version allowed. The discovery of the New Vegas prototype in 2025 at a Utah game store was one of the most significant events in the franchise's archival history. The development kits found there contained a build from the 21st of July 2010, just over a month before the game went gold. In that build, the Las Vegas Strip had no interior walls. The area was more open. The performance hadn't been optimized in ways that would require those divisions. Walking through the Strip in that prototype version feels like a different city from the one that shipped more urban, more continuous, more overwhelming. Fallout 4 cut a companion named Strong, or rather developed him less fully than other companions. Strong the super mutant is present in the shipped game, but his questline and his exploration of what it means to be a super mutant who is genuinely interested in human mythology feels underdeveloped compared to the depth given to Nick Valentine or Piper. Some of this may be intentional. Strong's simplicity is part of his character, but fan theories about what more developed Strong content might have looked like persist. Fallout 76's cut content is almost too extensive to catalog, given how much was added back in via updates. The original launch version was itself something like the world with the human NPCs, cut a decision made for development and technical reasons that fundamentally altered what the game was. The Wastelanders update was, in a real sense, the game becoming more like what was planned for it. There is a philosophical argument to be made that Fallout's cut content is part of its identity. The games are records of ambition that exceeded what could be completed in the available time. The things that got cut live in the files, in the holotapes with missing audio, in the terminal entries that reference quests that don't exist, in the companion dialogue flags that trigger on conditions that were never fully implemented. The Wasteland has ghosts. Some of them are the ghosts of content that never made it. Section 18. Fallout's place in video game history and culture. In October 1997, when the first Fallout shipped from Interplay Entertainment and slowly found its way onto PC hard drives across North America, it was a modest success in a niche genre. By 2024, when the Amazon Prime TV series debuted, and Fallout 4 became the best-selling game in Europe, despite being 9 years old, the franchise had transformed into a cultural touchstone accessible to people who had never played a video game. The distance between those 2 points is one of the more remarkable stories in entertainment history. The specific way it happened, not through a single breakthrough moment, but through the steady accumulation of depth, the way each game added to the world rather than replacing it, the way the fanbase grew by discovering the games on their own terms and bringing other people in, reflects something particular about how some creative works move through culture. Fallout found its audience in waves. The original 1997 game built a dedicated community that was small but intensely engaged. Fallout 2 deepened that community and introduced the franchise's reputation for extraordinary writing and moral complexity. Then there was a decade of darkness, the Black Isle closure, the canceled projects, the uncertain years when nobody was sure whether the franchise would continue. Bethesda's Fallout 3 Inches 2008 introduced the world to a version of Fallout that could reach mass audiences. A first-person open-world RPG built on the same engine as Oblivion, accessible, enormous, immediately compelling. A generation of players whose first RPG experience was Fallout 3 grew up with the franchise, and some of them then went back and played the original games, and discovered an entirely different kind of experience waiting for them. The franchise became layered in a way that rewarded depth of engagement. New Vegas in 2010, for many people, became the definitive expression of what Fallout should be. Made in 18 months by people who had been born and raised on the original games, it took Bethesda's expansive engine and filled it with the kind of complex, morally weighted writing that Tim Kaine and Leonard Boyarsky and their colleagues had established in 1997. Players who encountered New Vegas first sometimes worked backward to Fallout 3 and then all the way to the originals. The layering deepened further. Fallout 4 Inches 2015 was the highest budget, most technically ambitious expression of the franchise to date. It sold extremely well. It introduced settlement building and an expanded crafting system that some players loved and others felt distracted from the RPG elements that had defined the series. The debate about Fallout 4, whether it was a worthy entry in the franchise or a dilution of what made it special, has never fully resolved, and probably never will, because people come to Fallout from different directions and want different things from it, and Fallout 4 is more generous to some of those desires than others. The TV series in 2024 changed the franchise's cultural reach in a way that nothing before it had. It reached people who don't play games. It reached people who had never heard of the ink spots. It reached people who had no frame of reference for what VATS was or what a Deathclaw looked like, and many of those people then played the games. Fallout 4 became a #1 bestseller in Europe in April 2024, almost a decade after its release. People were buying a 9-year-old game because they had watched a TV show and wanted more. The franchise had achieved something that most franchises don't: genuine transmedia resonance, where the television work and the game work each made the other richer, and neither one required you to have experienced the other to engage with it fully. The community that has built up around Fallout over 29 years is one of the most dedicated in gaming. The fan wikis are extraordinarily detailed. The Fallout Wiki and the Fallout Archive Wiki contain more information about the franchise's world than most encyclopedia volumes about real historical periods. Players have reconstructed the complete lore of the pre-war era from hundreds of in-game terminal entries, holotapes, and passing references in dialogue. The Fallout Bible that Chris Avellone created during the Black Isle era has been parsed, argued over, reconciled with subsequent canon, and revised by the community's own scholarship. There are players who have spent more time in the Fallout universe than in many real places, who have walked every square kilometer of the capital wasteland, the Mojave, the Commonwealth, who have read every terminal, who know where every bobblehead is without a guide, who remember exactly where they were the first time a Deathclaw appeared over a ridge and how fast they ran. The franchise has earned that kind of engagement by taking its audience seriously, by hiding things that reward curiosity, by writing stories that assume the player is intelligent, by building a world full enough that the more attention you give it, the more it gives back. The wasteland is generous to those who wander slowly. Section 19. The sounds and stations of the wasteland. Galaxy News Radio in Fallout 3 is voiced by a character called Three Dog, a DJ who broadcasts music and news across the capital wasteland from a station in the ruins of Washington. Three Dog is exuberant, politically committed to opposing the Enclave and supporting ordinary wastelanders, and constitutionally incapable of shutting up. His commentary on the Lone Wanderer's actions updates as the story progresses. He reports on what you've done, what the factions are doing, how the water situation is developing. His voice is a constant in the background of the capital wasteland, both a source of information and a companion of sorts for players who spend long stretches exploring without human company. The choice to give Fallout 3's radio station a personality, an actual character running it, reacting to events, giving the player feedback through the medium of in-world broadcast was one of Bethesda's smartest decisions. It transformed the music selection from a soundtrack into a diegetic element. The songs were playing in the world. Real people in the wasteland could hear them if they had functional radio receivers. Three Dog was real. The music was real. You were listening to the same station as every survivor in the capital wasteland. Mr. New Vegas in Fallout New Vegas has a different quality. He is smoother, more polished, with the voice and manner of a pre-war entertainer. He plays the Mojave's playlist and gives stylized news reports that frame events in the detached language of a broadcast professional. There is something slightly uncanny about him. He is never seen. He is never located. His true nature, what he actually is, whether he is a real person or an AI or something else, is never confirmed. He may be entirely automated. He may have been a real man once. The game does not say. The music on the Mojave station skews toward different pre-war artists than the Capital Wastelands playlist: Johnny Guitar, Blue Moon, Heartaches by the Number. The Mojave's musical palette reflects its setting, the American Southwest in the mid-20th century, cowboy films and casino music and long desert drives on two-lane roads. The music is geographically specific in a way that deepens the sense of being in a particular place with a particular history. Fallout 4's Diamond City Radio is hosted by Travis Miles, a man who begins the game as deeply anxious and timid on the air, and who can be helped through a companion quest involving Piper and the in-world newspaper to become more confident. His broadcast persona changes as the game progresses. He becomes himself, or closer to it. Listening to him over a long playthrough creates a sense of actual character development delivered through the medium of radio broadcasting. He is not one of the most beloved companions, and he is not technically a companion at all, but for players who kept the radio on, Travis Miles is someone they know. The pre-war music selection across all the games is not just aesthetic, it is curatorial. The people who chose these songs understood what they were doing. They were selecting music that would feel profoundly, heartbreakingly familiar to people of a certain age. The grandparent generation of the players who were buying the games in 2008 and 2010 and 2015 while placing it in a context of utter destruction. The sentimentality of the music and the wreckage of the world it played over created a frequency of emotion that was entirely its own. The ink spot's "It's All Over, But the Crying" plays in Fallout New Vegas's first casino area. You can hear it while entering the Tops Casino for the first time, if you've kept the radio on. The song is about the end of a relationship. The title says exactly what it says. In the context of the Mojave Wasteland in 2281, 200 years after the bombs fell, the phrase "all over, but the crying" is an almost unbearably layered description of the state of things. The crying has also been going on for 200 years. There is still a civilization here, barely. All over but the crying, and also not all over and also still crying. The ambient sounds that aren't music are equally considered. The wasteland at night has specific sounds that the wasteland in daylight does not. The wind changes character in different biomes. Ruined buildings creak in ways that suggest specific structural damage. Water moves in ways calibrated to the size and speed of the stream. The environmental audio in Fallout games is doing enormous work to create the sense of inhabited space, or of space that was inhabited once and is slowly returning to something else. The sound of power armor being worn is perhaps the most recognizable audio signature in the franchise. The heavy footfall, the slight mechanical hiss of the servos, the way ambient sounds are slightly muffled when you're inside the helmet. It communicates weight and protection, and also isolation. You are sealed in. The world continues outside. The sounds reaching you through the suit are slightly changed from the sounds you would hear without it. Holotapes in later games have audio quality variations that tell you something about when they were recorded and under what conditions. A holotape made in a functioning pre-war studio has clean audio. A holotape recorded in a ruined building with a dying device has static and compression artifacts. A holotape recorded by someone who is frightened has breath sounds and stumbles. The audio design respects the fiction of the medium. These are recordings made in circumstances that affected the recordings. The sound of a Geiger counter, the quiet background tick in low radiation areas, the alarmed acceleration as radiation intensifies, is one of Fallout's most ASMR-adjacent elements. It is a steady, rhythmic sound that communicates danger through tempo rather than through shock. The faster it ticks, the worse the situation. But even at moderate levels, it has a quality of measured attention, of careful monitoring, of not quite panic. It is the sound of paying close attention to something that matters. The combination of all these audio elements, the pre-war music, the holotape voices, the environmental sounds, the weapon sounds, the ambient wind and water and creaking infrastructure creates the sonic world of Fallout, which is as recognizable as any visual element of the franchise. You could close your eye up at a Fallout game and identify the setting almost immediately from sound alone. That is the mark of a world that was designed with full dimensional attention. Closing notes for Section 12 expanded. There is one more thing worth sitting with as the wasteland settles around you. Fallout has been telling the same story for 29 years, in different voices and from different angles, and it has never run out of things to say. The story is, this is what happens when power convinces itself that cruelty is care. This is what happens when institutions optimize for their own continuation over the well-being of the people inside them. This is what remains when everything else is stripped away. This is who you are when there are no easy options, and you still have to choose. The franchise was born from a programmer working alone for 6 months with no official sanction. It grew through financial pressure and collapsed studios and passionate people who kept coming back to this particular world because it felt worth building. It survived the transition from one set of creators to another, and then survived it again, and arrived in 2024 as a television series that reached tens of millions of people who had never had the franchise in their lives before. The wasteland is larger than it has ever been. And somewhere in the files of every Fallout game, in the terminal entries that nobody is assigned to read, and the texture files that require specific tools to examine, in the holotapes that autoplay while the player is doing something else, in the companion dialogue that triggers only after specific conditions are met, the people who built these worlds left small pieces of themselves. Hidden jokes, personal tributes, signatures in unexplained places, evidence of care in circumstances that did not require it. That is the thing that the wasteland keeps showing us. That care persists. That someone, somewhere, took the time to do something they didn't have to do, because they wanted to, because they loved it, because the thing they were building deserved better than the minimum. Tim Kaine, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, 2 years straight, building the end of the world because it felt worth building. The wasteland thanks him for it. We all do. Thank you for listening. Sleep well. The radio is still playing. Section 20. The small things that made the wasteland real. There is a detail in Fallout New Vegas that most players never find. In the settlement of Novak, there is a motel room. Room 1 that can be rented for a few caps and serves as a player home. In the room's bathroom, there is a specific shelf arrangement with specific items on it. Nothing unusual. Except, if you look at the shelf over time across multiple in-game days, the items shift slightly. Things move. Rearrange. The motel room appears occupied even when no one is there. There is no quest attached. There is no monster in the room. There is no explanation provided. It is a detail that exists purely to make the world feel like it breathes without you in it, like the wasteland continues when you're not watching. That is the principle underlying every small detail in the franchise's history. The world should breathe. Things should exist for reasons other than serving the player's immediate needs. The terminal entries should continue past the point where the relevant quest information ends, into personal confessions and petty arguments and observations about the weather, and concerns about children and opinions about coworkers, because that is what real records contain. The holotape should sometimes be about nothing important, because that is what recordings are sometimes about. The skeletons in the ruins should sometimes be found in positions suggesting what they were doing when they died asleep in bed, sitting at a desk, standing at a window looking out. The McClellan house, with its poetry-reading robot and its children's bedroom and its dead dog in the yard, is not necessary. Nobody had to build that. It added nothing to the main quest. It was not in any mission structure. It was built because a developer named Joel Burgess loved Ray Bradbury and loved the story There Will Come Soft Rains, and thought that a tribute to it, placed in the ruins of post-nuclear Washington, was worth the time it would take to create. He was right. It was. And the fact that most players walked past it without understanding what they were seeing doesn't diminish it. The world has things in it that you missed. The things are still there. There is an unmarked grave in Fallout New Vegas, out in the desert near Good Springs. It has a headstone. The headstone reads only a name. There is no quest that requires you to find it. No bounty hunter is looking for the person buried there. No survivor is asking about them. The grave is just there, alone in the desert, with its simple headstone, marking someone who died and was remembered well enough for someone to put a stone on the ground. In a world where many people die and are left where they fall, someone cared enough to dig. That's Fallout. That's what it keeps doing. In the small details that accumulate across 30 years of games and tens of thousands of hand-placed items and individually recorded audio clips and specifically positioned skeletons. It keeps making the case that people mattered, that the individuals who lived in the pre-war world had lives worth imagining, that the individuals who survived the post-war world have lives worth recording, that the world is full of unmarked graves with headstones on them, placed there by someone who loved the person underneath and had 20 minutes and a chisel and decided the marker was worth making. In Fallout 4, there is a conversation between two characters sitting by a campfire in the wasteland. They are not major characters. They have no quest to give. They are just two people sitting by a fire, having a conversation about nothing important, about something one of them saw earlier, about whether the weather is changing, about an absent friend. If you walk up to them and stay, they finish the conversation, and then they go back to their ordinary lives in the ordinary ruins, and you can keep walking. The conversation existed to make the world feel inhabited by people who existed before you arrived and will continue existing after you leave. Some development studios count NPCs as background decoration. Bethesda and Obsidian have spent 30 years treating them as people who needed specific internal lives, even the ones who had only a sentence or two of dialogue. The result is a world that feels populated in a way that goes beyond headcount. The radios that still play pre-war music are real transmitters. Someone, somewhere in the wasteland, is maintaining them. Galaxy News Radio has a building that the Brotherhood of Steel eventually fortifies to keep it running. The Mojave's stations have physical locations in the game world. Mr. New Vegas broadcasts from somewhere. The music does not play by magic. There is infrastructure, maintained by specific characters or organizations, that keeps the airwaves alive. The franchise bothers with that. The infrastructure is real. The detail is there for anyone who looks for it. In the downtown ruins of Washington, D.C. in Fallout 3, there is a moment that many players experienced without fully understanding what they were seeing. You are moving through the rubble, and you come around a corner, and suddenly the Washington Monument is there damaged, partially collapsed, but standing. It is enormous in the context of the ruined city around it. It is more present than anything else in the landscape, and the game does something clever with it. It lets you see it before it marks it on your map. The monument appears to you before the game officially acknowledges its existence. You find it. It doesn't tell you to find it. That is the experience Fallout is always trying to create. The sense that you are moving through a real world and finding things, not being moved through a level design and told what matters. The Washington Monument was there before the bombs. It is still there after. You found it on your own. It means something different to you because of that. In the Capitol Wasteland, the tattered flags that hang from ruined buildings are the Stars and Stripes. They have not been replaced. Nobody has put up a new flag for the NCR or the Brotherhood or any other post-war faction. The old flag is still there, 200 years after the country it represented ceased to exist. Some of those flags are remarkably well preserved for cloth that's been through a nuclear war. The game's art team put effort into making them specifically ragged in specific ways, some torn, some faded, some almost intact, rather than using a generic damage texture. The flags are not all the same damage. The world doesn't use generic damage. Somewhere in the Commonwealth, in a building that is not on the main quest path and is not marked on the map, there is a skeleton sitting in front of a terminal. The terminal has no significant information. The skeleton is not important to any mission. The skeleton is sitting in what was clearly their workspace, in front of their computer, in the position they were in when the bombs fell. The sole survivor can read what was on their screen. It was a work email, half-written, about something that had been due that afternoon. They were at work when the world ended. They were in the middle of a sentence. That detail is not in a guide. It is not famous. Nobody made a video about it. It exists in the world because someone at Bethesda built it and decided it should be there, because that is what the truth of that day would have looked like for millions of people. They were doing ordinary things. They were in the middle of sentences. The wasteland remembers them. It holds their unfinished sentences in its ruins. It plays their music. It keeps their recipes on kitchen tablets in ruined houses. It holds, in terminal entries and holotapes and the shapes of spaces people built and loved and lost, the complete record of a civilization that ended too quickly to finish what it was saying. That is why people keep going back. Not for the death clause. Not for the loot. Not even for the extraordinary faction storytelling and the moral complexity of the endings. They go back because the wasteland holds things. Because it is the most detailed archive of a world that never existed that fiction has ever produced. Because somewhere in the ruins, in a room they haven't found yet, is another terminal entry, another holotape, another skeleton that tells another story. The world is full of things to find. The radio is still playing. The walk is never done. End of script. Section 21. Fallout's real-world roots and the places that inspired the wasteland. One of the more remarkable things about Fallout's world is how much of it is drawn from real places. Not the post-nuclear versions, the real, actual, still-standing locations that designers used as references, that writers knew personally, that gave specific places their specificity. Washington, D.C. in Fallout 3 was designed using a combination of map data, photography, and direct observation. Members of the development team walked the National Mall. They photographed the monuments. They stood in front of the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument and the Capitol building and imagined what they would look like 200 years after a nuclear war. The resulting rendition is not photorealistic, the scale is compressed, the distances between landmarks are shorter than in reality, but it is unmistakably Washington. You know where you are. The landmarks read correctly. The relationship between major buildings feels right even in the compression. Boston in Fallout 4 was subjected to the same process, and Bethesda's art team produced a post-nuclear Boston that is immediately legible to anyone who knows the city. Fenway Park as Diamond City. The Freedom Trail as an actual navigable path through the city's ruins. The Boston Public Library, the Old North Church, Quincy, Concord, all of them present, all of them distorted by 2 centuries of decay and improvisation, all of them recognizable. The game became a kind of love letter to a real city written in the language of apocalypse. Appalachia in Fallout 76 is perhaps the most precisely rendered real location in the franchise. The hills of West Virginia, the Greenbrier Resort as White Spring, the New River Gorge, the flat farmland of the Eastern Panhandle, all of it translated into the game world with unusual geographic fidelity. The decision to center the game in Appalachia was also a deliberate cultural choice. This is a region of the United States with its own mythologies, its own cryptids, its own historical relationship to labor and industry and federal neglect. The Mothman of Point Pleasant, the Grafton Monster, the folklore of a place that has always operated somewhat outside the national mainstream. Fallout 76 used all of it. Las Vegas in Fallout New Vegas is the franchise's most direct engagement with a real, still-functioning city. New Vegas is an alternate timeline version of the city that, in the Fallout universe, was spared most of the direct nuclear strikes because of Robert House's defensive systems, the same man who eventually became its ruler. The Mojave of New Vegas is recognizably Nevada. The geography, the dust, the particular quality of the light in a desert landscape, the scattered small towns between long stretches of empty road, all of it lands correctly for anyone who has driven through that part of the American Southwest. The pre-war neighborhoods visible in various Fallout games are built from mid-century American suburban architecture that still exists in the real world. The ranch houses with their attached garages, the shopping centers with their large parking lots, the diners with their neon signs and their counter seating and their milkshake machines, these are real building types, still standing in many parts of the US, that Fallout transforms into ruins. Playing Fallout after you have driven through certain suburbs of mid-century American cities produces a strange recognition. The bones of the buildings are right, the shapes are correct. The ruins are imaginary, but the architecture is real. The music is real, the ink spots are real. Bing Crosby and Perry Como and Doris Day and Roy Brown and Vera Lynn all recorded real music that really exists and is really available to hear. The franchise's choice to use actual pre-war recordings rather than composed pastiches of them was a choice to anchor the aesthetic in something genuinely historical. When I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire plays, it is the actual 1941 recording. The voice you hear is a real voice that sang in a real studio. The song existed before the game. It will exist after. The game borrowed it for the duration of a playthrough and gave it back, slightly transformed by context. These roots in reality are part of why the Fallout world feels navigable in a way that pure fantasy settings sometimes don't. You can find your way around the DC area in the games partially because you know where things should be. You can feel the weight of the Boston setting partially because Boston has weight in real history and culture and literature. You can hear the music and feel it partially because people you might have loved also heard it once. The franchise did not build its world from scratch. It built it from the ruins of the actual world, very slightly transformed, and the recognition that produces is one of the most specific feelings gaming has to offer. Every landmark in the wasteland was a landmark first. Every song on the radio was a song first. Every building style was a building style first. Fallout is, at its foundation, an act of preservation, a very strange post-apocalyptic preservation of things that still exist in the actual world, placed inside a fictional framework that asks what they would look like if everything had ended differently. The things it preserves are the ordinary things, the diners, the parking lots, the ranch houses, the popular music of people's grandparents and great-grandparents, the things that were most normal, most ubiquitous, most representative of an era at its most optimistic. The franchise puts those things in a museum of destruction and says, "This is what we had, and this is what we did with it." The ink spots keep singing, the radio towers keep broadcasting. The flag over the ruined post office still catches the wasteland wind. And somewhere out there, in a room nobody has found yet, is another terminal with another entry, another sentence somebody started and didn't finish, waiting for someone with the patience to walk slowly enough to find it. The world is still there. It always will be. Final end. Section 22. The people who kept the wasteland alive. Modders, fans, and the community. No honest account of Fallout's history is complete without the people who have spent decades extending it, fixing it, and building things inside it that the developers never planned for. The modding community around Fallout is one of the largest and most creative in gaming, and some of what they have produced is genuinely remarkable. The Fallout modding scene began almost immediately after the first game shipped. Players who understood the file formats started opening them up and exploring what was inside. They found the structures. They found the assets. They found, in some cases, things the developers had put there that they hadn't announced, and in other cases, things that revealed how the sausage was made. Fallout's files are, for anyone technically curious enough to look, a kind of archive of the game's construction. The New Vegas modding community, in particular, produced an extensive body of work that addressed the game's cut content. Mods that added Ulysses to the base game as a companion, built from the dialogue and assets that remained in the files. Mods that restored cut quests, the Prim Casino content, the Legion zones east of the Colorado River, fragments of the post-dam experience that Obsidian hadn't had time to complete. These restoration projects required deep knowledge of the game's files, of Obsidian's design intentions, and of the specific ways in which content had been removed. They were acts of archaeology, not just modding. The Project Nevada mod rewrote significant portions of New Vegas's mechanics, adding systems that gave the game a more tactical feel. The New California mod added an entirely new game-length story set in the NCR's home territory, built in the New Vegas engine. The Fallout New Vegas Dust mod reimagined the entire game as a survival horror experience, stripping most of the narrative content and leaving a version of the Mojave that had deteriorated even further from the base game's already dire conditions. For Fallout 4, the mod community produced Fallout London, an extraordinary project that set a full game-length story in post-nuclear Britain using the Fallout 4 engine but entirely original assets, environments, factions, and writing. It was released in 2024 after years of development, entirely by volunteers, and received coverage from major gaming publications. It demonstrated that the Fallout template, the specific combination of post-apocalyptic world, faction, politics, player choice, and environmental storytelling was robust enough to function in an entirely different geography and culture. The fan theories community has been generating content since at least 1998. The original No Mutants Allowed forum was one of the early centers of Fallout theory discussion, and it accumulated decades of careful reading of the game's lore, cross-referencing between entries, timeline construction, and speculation about gaps. The Fallout lore communities on Reddit continued this tradition, with threads regularly reaching tens of thousands of words as posters assembled evidence for competing interpretations of what various events in the timeline meant. Some fan theories have been indirectly confirmed by developer statements over the years. Tim Kane's 2023 revelation about China launching the first nukes had been a popular theory for years before he confirmed it, based on lore evidence in multiple games suggesting American biological weapons programs as a possible casus belli. The theory was built from the same evidence he had in mind when writing it. Other theories remain productively unconfirmed. The identity and nature of the mysterious stranger. The question of whether various protagonist characters are connected across games. The deeper implications of alien presence in the timeline. These are questions that the developers have declined to answer, not because they don't have thoughts about them, but because leaving them open serves the world better than closing them. There is a specific kind of love that fan communities have for their objects that manifests most clearly in obsessive archival work. The Fallout fan community has preserved the game files from multiple versions of multiple games, cataloged the differences, documented the cut content, transcribed every piece of in-game text, and made it all searchable. The franchise's complete written output millions of words across all the games, terminal entries, holotapes, notes, item descriptions, dialogue trees, loading screen tips has been assembled by volunteers into wikis that constitute one of the largest organized bodies of fictional lore in any medium. That is what happens when a creative work gives its audience enough to work with. They build their own archive of it. They become its historians. They decide it is worth preserving completely, in the same way that the game's designers decided individual lives in the wasteland were worth documenting completely. The franchise made them feel it was worth it. The franchise was right. One of the most moving things in all of Fallout fandom is the regularity with which people describe the games as having gotten them through difficult periods in their lives, through depression, through loss, through isolation. The wasteland, which is a place built from the premise of catastrophic loss, became for many people a kind of refuge during their own catastrophes. The ability to be in a world that was damaged but navigable, to have clear enough objectives in a setting where everything was uncertain, to build settlements and help companions and clean the water and repair the reactor, the act of managing small, achievable tasks inside an enormously broken world turned out to be therapeutic in ways that nobody planned. The franchise never intended to be that. It intended to be a very good game, built with care, full of secrets, respectful of the player's intelligence. The comfort people found in it was a side effect of the care of a world built with enough attention that it became habitable even at the worst times. That is perhaps the best tribute to everything the franchise has done. Not the sales figures, not the critical reception, not the TV series viewership numbers. The fact that somewhere, right now, while this is playing, someone is wandering the capital wasteland or the Mojave or the Commonwealth, and it is helping. The world is broken and beautiful and full of things to find, and they are finding them, and it is enough. The wasteland is generous. It always has been.